The Red Shoes. Once upon a time there was little girl, pretty and dainty, but in summer-time she was obliged to go barefooted because she was poor, and in winter she had to wear large wooden shoes so that her little instep grew quite red. In the middle of the village lived an old shoemaker's wife. She sat down and made, as well as she could, a pair of little shoes out of some old pieces of red cloth. They were clumsy, but she meant well, for they were intended for the little girl, whose name was Karen. Karen received the shoes and wore them for the first time on the day of her mother's funeral. They were certainly not suitable for mourning, but she had no others, and so she put her bare feet into them and walked behind the humble coffin. Just then a large old carriage came by, and in it sat an old lady. She looked at the little girl, and taking pity on her, said to the clergyman, "Look here, if you will give me the little girl, I will take care of her." Karen believed that this was all on account of the red shoes, but the old lady thought them hideous, and so they were burnt. Karen herself was dressed very neatly and cleanly. She was taught to read and to sew, and people said that she was pretty. But the mirror told her, "You are more than pretty, you are beautiful." One day the queen was travelling through that part of the country and had her little daughter, who was a princess, with her. All the people, amongst them Karen too, streamed towards the castle, where the little princess, in fine white clothes, stood before the window and allowed herself to be stared at. She wore neither a train nor a golden crown, but beautiful red morocco shoes. They were indeed much finer than those which the shoemaker's wife had sewn for little Karen. There is really nothing in the world that can be compared to red shoes. Karen was now old enough to be confirmed. She received some new clothes, and she was also to have some new shoes. The rich shoemaker in the town took the measure of her little foot in his own room, in which there stood great glass cases full of pretty shoes and white slippers. It all looked very lovely, but the old lady could not see very well, and therefore did not get much pleasure out of it. Amongst the shoes stood a pair of red ones, like those which the princess had worn. How beautiful they were! And the shoemaker said that they had been made for a count's daughter, but that they had not fitted her. "I suppose they are of shiny leather?" asked the old lady. "They shine so." "Yes, they do shine," said Karen. "They fitted her and were bought." But the old lady knew nothing of their being red, for she would never have allowed Karen to be confirmed in red shoes as she was now to be. Everybody looked at her feet, and the whole of the way from the church door to the choir. It seemed to her as if even the ancient figures on the monuments, in their stiff collars and long black robes, had their eyes fixed on her red shoes. It was only of these that she thought when the clergyman laid his hand upon her head and spoke of the holy baptism, of the covenant with God, and told her that she was now to be a grown-up Christian. The organ pealed forth solemnly, and the sweet children's voices mingled with that of their old leader, but Karen thought only of her red shoes. In the afternoon, the old lady heard from everybody that Karen had worn red shoes. She said that it was a shocking thing to do, that it was very improper, and that Karen was always to go to church in future in black shoes, even if they were old. On the following Sunday there was communion. Karen looked first at the black shoes, then at the red ones, looked at the red ones again, and put them on. The sun was shining gloriously, so Karen and the old lady went along the footpath through the corn, where it was rather dusty. At the church door stood an old crippled soldier leaning on a crutch. He had a wonderfully long beard, more red than white, and he bowed down to the ground and asked the old lady whether he might wipe her shoes. Then Karen put out her little foot too. "Dear me, what pretty dancing shoes," said the soldier. "Sit fast when you dance," said he, addressing the shoes and slapping the soles with his hand. The old lady gave the soldier some money and then went with Karen into the church. And all the people inside looked at Karen's red shoes, and all the figures gazed at them. When Karen knelt before the altar and put the golden goblet to her mouth, she thought only of the red shoes. It seemed to her as though they were swimming about in the goblet, and she forgot to sing the psalm, forgot to say the Lord's Prayer. Now everyone came out of church, and the old lady stepped into her carriage. But just as Karen was lifting up her foot to get in too, the old soldier said, "Dear me, what pretty dancing shoes!" And Karen could not help it. She was obliged to dance a few steps. And when she had once begun, her legs continued to dance. It seemed as if the shoes had got power over them. She danced round the church corner, for she could not stop. The coachman had to run after her and seize her. He lifted her into the carriage, but her feet continued to dance, so that she kicked the good old lady violently. At last they took off her shoes, and her legs were at rest. At home the shoes were put into the cupboard, but Karen could not help looking at them. Now the old lady fell ill, and it was said that she would not rise from her bed again. She had to be nursed and waited upon, and this was no one's duty more than Karen's. But there was a grand ball in the town, and Karen was invited. She looked at the red shoes. Saying to herself that there was no sin in doing that, she put the red shoes on, thinking there was no harm in that either. And then she went to the ball and commenced to dance. But when she wanted to go to the right, the shoes danced to the left, and when she wanted to dance up the room, the shoes danced down the room, down the stairs, through the street, and out through the gates of the town. She danced, and was obliged to dance, far out into the dark wood. Suddenly something shone up among the trees, and she believed it was the moon, for it was a face. But it was the old soldier with the red beard. He sat there nodding his head and said, "Dear me, what pretty dancing shoes!" She was frightened and wanted to throw the red shoes away, but they stuck fast. She tore off her stockings, but the shoes had grown fast to her feet. She danced, and was obliged to go on dancing over field and meadow, in rain and sunshine, by night and by day. But by night it was most horrible. She danced out into the open churchyard, but the dead there did not dance. They had something better to do than that. She wanted to sit down on the pauper's grave where the bitter fern grows, but for her there was neither peace nor rest. And as she danced past the open church door, she saw an angel there in long white robes, with wings reaching from his shoulders down to the earth. His face was stern and grave, and in his hand he held a broad shining sword. "Dance you shall," said he. "Dance in your red shoes till you are pale and cold, till your skin shrivels up and you are a skeleton. Dance you shall from door to door. And where proud and wicked children live, you shall knock, so that they may hear you and fear you. Dance you shall, dance." "Mercy!" cried Karen. But she did not hear what the angel answered, for the shoes carried her through the gate into the fields, along highways and byways, and unceasingly she had to dance. One morning she danced past a door that she knew well. They were singing a psalm inside, and a coffin was being carried out, covered with flowers. Then she knew that she was forsaken by everyone, and damned by the angel of God. She danced, and was obliged to go on dancing through the dark night. The shoes bore her away over thorns and stumps, till she was all torn and bleeding. She danced away over the heath to a lonely little house. Here, she knew, lived the executioner, and she tapped with her finger at the window and said, come out, I cannot come in, for I must dance." And the executioner said, "I don't suppose you know who I am. I strike off the heads of the wicked, and I notice that my axe is tingling to do so." "Don't cut off my head," said Karen, "for then I could not repent of my sin." but cut off my feet with the red shoes." And then she confessed all her sin, and the executioner struck off her feet with the red shoes. But the shoes danced away with the little feet across the field into the deep forest, and he carved her a pair of wooden feet and some crutches, and taught her a psalm which is always sung by sinners. She kissed the hand that guided the axe, and went away over the heath. "Now I have suffered enough for the red shoes," she said. "I will go to church, so that people can see me." And she went quickly up to the church door. But when she came there, the red shoes were dancing before her, and she was frightened and turned back. During the whole week she was sad and wept many bitter tears. But when Sunday came again, she said, "Now I have suffered and striven enough. I believe I am quite as good as many of those who sit in church and give themselves airs." And so she went boldly on. But she had not got farther than the churchyard gate when she saw the red shoes dancing along before her. Then she became terrified, and turned back and repented right heartily of her sin. She went to the parsonage and begged that she might be taken into service there. She would be industrious, she said, and do everything that she could. She did not mind about the wages as long as she had a roof over her and was with good people. The pastor's wife had pity on her and took her into service. And she was industrious and thoughtful. She sat quiet and listened when the pastor read aloud from the Bible in the evening. All the children liked her very much, but when they spoke about dress and grandeur and beauty, she would shake her head. On the following Sunday they all went to church, and she was asked whether she wished to go too, but with tears in her eyes she looked sadly at her crutches. And then the others went to hear God's word, but she went alone into her little room. This was only large enough to hold the bed and a chair. Here she sat down with her hymn book, and as she was reading it with a pious mind, the wind carried the notes of the organ over to her from the church, and in tears she lifted up her face and said, "Oh God, help me!" Then the sun shone so brightly, and right before her stood an angel of God in white robes. It was the same one whom she had seen that night at the church door. He no longer carried the sharp sword, but a beautiful green branch full of roses. With this he touched the ceiling, which rose up very high, and where he had touched it there shone a golden star. He touched the walls, which opened wide apart, and she saw the organ which was pealing forth. She saw the pictures of the old pastors and their wives, and the congregation sitting in the polished chairs and singing from their hymn books. The church itself had come to the poor girl in her narrow room, or the room had gone to the church. She sat in the pew with the rest of the pastor's household, and when they had finished the hymn and looked up, they nodded and said, "It was right of you to come, Karen." "It was mercy," said she. The organ played, and the children's voices in the choir sounded soft and lovely. The bright, warm sunshine streamed through the window into the pew where Karen sat, and her heart became so filled with it, so filled with peace and joy, that it broke. Her soul flew on the sunbeams to heaven, and no one was there who asked after the red shoes. The saucy boy. Once upon a time there was an old poet, one of those right good old poets. One evening, as he was sitting at home, there was a terrible storm going on outside. The rain was pouring down, but the old poet sat comfortably in his chimney corner, where the fire was burning and the apples were roasting. "There will not be a dry thread left on the poor people who are out in this weather," he said. "Oh, open the door." "I am so cold and wet through," called a little child outside. It was crying and knocking at the door whilst the rain was pouring down and the wind was rattling all the windows. "Poor creature," said the poet, and got up and opened the door. Before him stood a little boy. He was naked, and the water flowed from his long fair locks. He was shivering with cold. If he had not been let in, He would certainly have perished in the storm. "Poor little thing," said the poet, and took him by the hand. "Come to me. I will soon warm you. You shall have some wine and an apple, for you are such a pretty boy." And he was, too. His eyes sparkled like two bright stars, and although the water flowed down from his fair locks, they still curled quite beautifully. He looked like a little angel, but was pale with cold and trembling all over. In his hand he held a splendid bow, but it had been entirely spoilt by the rain, and the colours of the pretty arrows had run into one another by getting wet. The old man sat down by the fire, and taking the little boy on his knee, wrung the water out of his locks and warmed his hands in his own. He then made him some hot spiced wine, which quickly revived him, so that with reddening cheeks he sprang upon the floor and danced around the old man. "You are a merry boy," said the latter. "What is your name?" "My name is Cupid," he answered. "Don't you know me? There lies my bow. I shoot with that, you know. Look, the weather is getting fine again. The moon is shining." "But your bow is spoilt," said the old poet. "That would be unfortunate," said the little boy, taking it up and looking at it. "Oh, it's quite dry and isn't damaged at all. The string is quite tight. I'll try it." So, drawing it back, he took an arrow, aimed, and shot the good old poet right in the heart. "Do you see now that my bow was not spoilt?" he said, and, loudly laughing, ran away. What a naughty boy to shoot the old poet like that, who had taken him into his warm room, had been so good to him, and had given him the nicest wine and the best apple. The good old man lay upon the floor crying. He was really shot in the heart. "Oh!" he cried, "what a naughty boy this Cupid is! I shall tell all the good children about this, so that they take care never to play with him, lest he hurt them." And all good children, both girls and boys, whom he told about this, were on their guard against wicked Cupid. But he deceives them all the same, for he is very deep. When the students come out of class, he walks beside them with a book under his arm and wearing a black coat. They cannot recognize him. And then, if they take him by the arm, believing him to be a student too, he sticks an arrow into their chest. And when the girls go to church to be confirmed, he is amongst them too. In fact, he is always after people. He sits in the large chandelier in the theatre and blazes away, so that people think it is a lamp, but they soon find out their mistake. He walks about in the castle garden and on the promenades. Yes, once he shot your father and your mother in the heart too. Just ask them, and you will hear what they say. Oh, he is a bad boy, this Cupid, and you must never have anything to do with him, for he is after everyone. Just think, he even shot an arrow at old grandmother, but that was a long time ago. The wound has long been healed, but such things are never forgotten. Now you know what a bad boy this wicked Cupid is, the shadow. In very hot climates, where the heat of the sun has great power, people are usually as brown as mahogany, and in the hottest countries they are Negroes, with black skins. A learned man once travelled into one of these warm climates from the cold regions of the north, and thought he would roam about as he did at home. But he soon had to change his opinion. He found that, like all sensible people, he must remain in the house during the whole day, with every window and door closed, so that it looked as if all in the house were asleep or absent. The houses of the narrow street in which he lived were so lofty that the sun shone upon them from morning till evening, and it became quite unbearable. This learned man from the cold regions was young as well as clever, but it seemed to him as if he were sitting in an oven, and he became quite exhausted and weak, and grew so thin that his shadow shriveled up and became much smaller than it had been at home. The sun took away even what was left of it, and he saw nothing of it till the evening. after sunset. It was really a pleasure, as soon as the lights were brought into the room, to see the shadow stretch itself against the wall, even to the ceiling. So tall was it, and it really wanted a good stretch to recover its strength. The learned man would sometimes go out into the balcony to stretch himself also. And as soon as the stars came forth in the clear, beautiful sky, he felt revived. People at this hour began to make their appearance in all the balconies in the street, for in warm climates every window has a balcony, in which they can breathe the fresh evening air, which is very necessary, even to those who are used to a heat that makes them as brown as mahogany, so that the street presented a very lively appearance. Here were shoemakers and tailors, and all sorts of people sitting. In the street beneath, they brought out tables and chairs, lighted candles by hundreds, talked and sang, and were very merry. There were people walking, carriages driving, and mules trotting along, with their bells on the harness, tingle, tingle, as they went. Then the dead were carried to the grave with the sound of solemn music and the tolling of the church bells. It was indeed a scene of varied life in the street. One house only, which was just opposite to the one in which the foreign learned man lived, formed a contrast to all this, for it was quite still, and yet somebody dwelt there. For flowers stood in the balcony, blooming beautifully in the hot sun, and this could not have been unless they had been watered carefully. Therefore, someone must be in the house to do this. The doors leading to the balcony were half opened in the evening, and although in the front room all was dark, music could be heard from the interior of the house. The foreign learned man considered this music very delightful, but perhaps he fancied it, for everything in these warm countries pleased him, excepting the heat of the sun. The foreign landlord said he did not know who had taken the opposite house. Nobody was to be seen there, and as to the music, he thought it seemed very tedious, to him most uncommonly so. It is just as if someone was practicing a piece that he could not manage. It is always the same piece. He thinks, I suppose, that he will be able to manage it at last, but I do not think so, however long he may play it. Once the foreigner woke in the night. He slept with the door open which led to the balcony. The wind had raised the curtain before it, and there appeared a wonderful brightness over all in the balcony of the opposite house. The flowers seemed like flames of the most gorgeous colours, and among the flowers stood a beautiful slender maiden. It was to him as if light streamed from her and dazzled his eyes. But then he had only just opened them as he awoke from his sleep. With one spring he was out of bed and crept softly behind the curtain. But she was gone. The brightness had disappeared. The flowers no longer appeared like flames, although still as beautiful as ever. The door stood ajar, and from an inner room sounded music so sweet and so lovely that it produced the most enchanting thoughts and acted on the senses with magic power. Who could live there? Where was the real entrance? For, both in the street and in the lane at the side, the whole ground floor was a continuation of shops, and people could not always be passing through them. One evening the foreigner sat in the balcony. A light was burning in his own room, just behind him. It was quite natural, therefore, that his shadow should fall on the wall of the opposite house, so that, as he sat amongst the flowers on his balcony, when he moved, his shadow moved also. "I think my shadow is the only living thing to be seen opposite," said the learned man. "See how pleasantly it sits among the flowers. The door is only ajar. The shadow ought to be clever enough to step in and look about him, and then to come back and tell me what he has seen. You could make yourself useful in this way," said he jokingly. "Be so good as to step in now, will you?" And then he nodded to the shadow, and the shadow nodded in return. "Now go, but don't stay away altogether." Then the foreigner stood up, and the shadow on the opposite balcony stood up also. The foreigner turned round. The shadow turned, and if anyone had observed, they might have seen it go straight into the half-open door of the opposite balcony as the learned man re-entered his own room and let the curtain fall. The next morning he went out to take his coffee and read the newspapers. "How is this?" he exclaimed as he stood in the sunshine. "I have lost my shadow. So it really did go away yesterday evening, and it has not returned. This is very annoying." And it certainly did vex him, not so much because the shadow was gone, but because he knew there was a story of a man without a shadow. All the people at home, in his country, knew this story, and when he returned and related his own adventures, they would say it was only an imitation, and he had no desire for such things to be said of him. So he decided not to speak of it at all, which was a very sensible determination. In the evening, he went out again on his balcony, taking care to place the light behind him, for he knew that a shadow always wants his master for a screen, but he could not entice him out. He made himself little, and he made himself tall, but there was no shadow, and no shadow came. He said, "Hem, ahem," but it was all useless. That was very vexatious, but in warm countries everything grows very quickly, and after a week had passed, he saw, to his great joy, that a new shadow was growing from his feet when he walked in the sunshine, so that the root must have remained. After 3 weeks he had quite a respectable shadow, which, during his return journey to northern lands, continued to grow, and became at last so large that he might very well have spared half of it. When this learned man arrived at home, he wrote books about the true, the good, and the beautiful, which are to be found in this world. And so days and years passed. Many, many years. One evening, as he sat in his study, a very gentle tap was heard at the door. "Come in," said he, but no one came. He opened the door, and there stood before him a man so remarkably thin that he felt seriously troubled at his appearance. He was, however, very well dressed, and looked like a gentleman. "To whom have I the honour of speaking?" said he. "Ah, I hoped you would recognize me," said the elegant stranger. "I have gained so much that I have a body of flesh and clothes to wear. You never expected to see me in such a condition. Do you not recognize your old shadow? Ah, you never expected that I should return to you again. All has been prosperous with me since I was with you last. I have become rich in every way, and, were I inclined to purchase my freedom from service, I could easily do so." And as he spoke, he rattled between his fingers a number of costly trinkets which hung to a thick gold watch, chain he wore round his neck. Diamond rings sparkled on his fingers, and it was all real. "I cannot recover from my astonishment," said the learned man. "What does all this mean?" "Something rather unusual," said the shadow. "But you are yourself an uncommon man, and you know very well that I have followed in your footsteps ever since your childhood. As soon as you found that I have travelled enough to be trusted alone, I went my own way, and I am now in the most brilliant circumstances. But I felt a kind of longing to see you once more before you die, and I wanted to see this place again, for there is always a clinging to the land of one's birth. I know that you have now another shadow. Do I owe you anything? If so, have the goodness to say what it is." "No. Is it really you?" said the learned man. "Well, this is most remarkable. I never supposed it possible that a man's old shadow could become a human being." "Just tell me what I owe you," said the shadow, "for I do not like to be in debt to any man." "How can you talk in that manner?" said the learned man. "What question of debt can there be between us? You are as free as anyone." I rejoice exceedingly to hear of your good fortune. Sit down, old friend, and tell me a little of how it happened, and what you saw in the house opposite to me while we were in those hot climates." "Yes, I will tell you all about it," said the shadow, sitting down. "But then you must promise me never to tell in this city, wherever you may meet me, that I have been your shadow. I am thinking of being married, for I have more than sufficient to support a family." "Make yourself quite easy," said the learned man. "I will tell no one who you really are. Here is my hand, I promise, and a word is sufficient between man and man." "Between man and a shadow," said the shadow, for he could not help saying so. It was really most remarkable how very much he had become a man in appearance. He was dressed in a suit of the very finest black cloth, polished boots, and an opera-crush hat, which could be folded together so that nothing could be seen but the crown and the rim, besides the trinkets, the gold chain, and the diamond rings already spoken of. The shadow was, in fact, very well dressed, and this made a man of him. "Now I will relate to you what you wish to know," said the shadow, placing his foot with the polished leather boot as firmly as possible on the arm of the new shadow of the learned man, which lay at his feet like a poodle dog. This was done, it might be from pride, or perhaps that the new shadow might cling to him, but the prostrate shadow remained quite quiet and at rest, in order that it might listen, for it wanted to know how a shadow could be sent away by its master and become a man itself. "Do you know," said the shadow, "that in the house opposite to you lived the most glorious creature in the world? It was poetry. I remained there 3 weeks, and it was more like 3,000 years, for I read all that has ever been written in poetry or prose, and I may say in truth that I saw and learnt everything." "Poetry!" exclaimed the learned man. "Yes, she lives as a hermit in great cities. Poetry. Well, I saw her once for a very short moment, while sleep weighed down my eyelids. She flashed upon me from the balcony like the radiant aurora borealis, surrounded with flowers like flames of fire. Tell me, you were on the balcony that evening. You went through the door, and what did you see?" "I found myself in an anteroom," said the shadow. "You still sat opposite to me, looking into the room. There was no light, or at least it seemed in partial darkness, for the door of a whole suite of rooms stood open, and they were brilliantly lighted. The blaze of light would have killed me, had I approached too near the maiden myself, but I was cautious and took time, which is what everyone ought to do." "And what didst thou see?" asked the learned man. "I saw everything, as you shall hear." "But it really is not pride on my part. As a free man, and possessing the knowledge that I do, besides my position, not to speak of my wealth. I wish you would say you to me instead of thou." "I beg your pardon," said the learned man. "It is an old habit, which it is difficult to break. You are quite right. I will try to think of it. But now, tell me everything that you saw." "Everything," said the shadow, "for I saw and know everything." "What was the appearance of the inner rooms?" asked the scholar. "Was it there like a cool grove, or like a holy temple? Were the chambers like a starry sky seen from the top of a high mountain?" "It was all that you describe," said the shadow. "But I did not go quite in. I remained in the twilight of the anteroom, but I was in a very good position. I could see and hear all that was going on in the court of poetry." "But what did you see? Did the gods of ancient times pass through the rooms? Did old heroes fight their battles over again? Were there lovely children at play? Who related their dreams? I tell you, I have been there, and therefore you may be sure that I saw everything that was to be seen." If you had gone there, you would not have remained a human being, whereas I became one. And at the same moment, I became aware of my inner being, my inborn affinity to the nature of poetry. It is true, I did not think much about it while I was with you, but you will remember that I was always much larger at sunrise and sunset, and in the moonlight even more visible than yourself. But I did not then understand my inner existence. In the anteroom it was revealed to me. I became a man. I came out in full maturity. But you had left the warm countries. As a man, I felt ashamed to go about without boots or clothes, and that exterior finish by which man is known. So I went my own way, I can tell you, for you will not put it in a book. I hid myself under the cloak of a cake woman, but she little thought who she concealed. It was not till evening that I ventured out. I ran about the streets in the moonlight. I drew myself up to my full height upon the walls, which tickled my back very pleasantly. I ran here and there, looked through the highest windows into the rooms and over the roofs. I looked in and saw what nobody else could see, or indeed ought to see. In fact, it is a bad world, and I would not care to be a man, but that men are of some importance. I saw the most miserable things going on between husbands and wives, parents and children, sweet, incomparable children. I have seen what no human being has the power of knowing, although they would all be very glad to know, the evil conduct of their neighbours. Had I written a newspaper, how eagerly it would have been read! Instead of which, I wrote directly to the persons themselves, and great alarm arose in all the town I visited. They had so much fear of me, and yet how dearly they loved me. The professor made me a professor. The tailor gave me new clothes. I am well provided for in that way. The overseer of the mint struck coins for me. The women declared that I was handsome, and so I became the man you now see me. And now I must say adieu. Here is my card. I live on the sunny side of the street and always stay at home in rainy weather. And the shadow departed. This is all very remarkable, said the learned man. Years passed. Days and years went by, and the shadow came again. How are you going on now? He asked. Ah, said the learned man, I am writing about the true, the beautiful, and the good, but no one cares to hear anything about it. I am quite in despair, for I take it to heart very much. That is what I never do, said the shadow. I am growing quite fat and stout, which everyone ought to be. You do not understand the world. You will make yourself ill about it. You ought to travel. I am going on a journey in the summer. Will you go with me? I should like a travelling companion. Will you travel with me as my shadow? It would give me great pleasure, and I will pay all expenses. Are you going to travel far? Asked the learned man. That is a matter of opinion, replied the shadow. At all events, a journey will do you good, and if you will be my shadow, then all your journey shall be paid. It appears to me very absurd, said the learned man. But it is the way of the world, replied the shadow, and always will be. Then he went away. Everything went wrong with the learned man. Sorrow and trouble pursued him, and what he said about the good, the beautiful, and the true was of as much value to most people as a nutmeg would be to a cow. At length he fell ill. You really look like a shadow, people said to him, and then a cold shudder would pass over him, for he had his own thoughts on the subject. You really ought to go to some watering place, said the shadow on his next visit. There is no other chance for you. I will take you with me, for the sake of old acquaintance. I will pay the expenses of your journey, and you shall write a description of it to amuse us by the way. I should like to go to a watering place. My beard does not grow as it ought, which is from weakness, and I must have a beard. Now do be sensible and accept my proposal. We shall travel as intimate friends." And at last they started together. The shadow was master now, and the master became the shadow. They drove together and rode and walked in company with each other, side by side, or one in front and the other behind, according to the position of the sun. The shadow always knew when to take the place of honor, but the learned man took no notice of it, for he had a good heart and was exceedingly mild and friendly. One day the master said to the shadow, "We have grown up together from our childhood, and now that we have become travelling companions, shall we not drink to our good fellowship, and say thee and thou to each other?" "What you say is very straightforward and kindly meant," said the shadow, who was now really master. "I will be equally kind and straightforward. You are a learned man, and know how wonderful human nature is. There are some men who cannot endure the smell of brown paper. It makes them ill. Others will feel a shuddering sensation to their very marrow if a nail is scratched on a pane of glass. I myself have a similar kind of feeling when I hear anyone say thou to me. I feel crushed by it, as I used to feel in my former position with you. You will perceive that this is a matter of feeling, not pride. I cannot allow you to say thou to me. I will gladly say it to you, and therefore your wish will be half fulfilled." Then the shadow addressed his former master as thou. "It is going rather too far," said the latter, "that I am to say you when I speak to him, and he is to say thou to me." However, he was obliged to submit. They arrived at length at the baths, where there were many strangers, and among them a beautiful princess, whose real disease consisted in being too sharp-sighted, which made everyone very uneasy. She saw at once that the newcomer was very different to everyone else. "They say he is here to make his beard grow," she thought, "but I know the real cause. He is unable to cast a shadow." Then she became very curious on the matter, and one day, while on the promenade, she entered into conversation with a strange gentleman. Being a princess, she was not obliged to stand upon much ceremony, so she said to him without hesitation, "Your illness consists in not being able to cast a shadow." "Your Royal Highness must be on the high road to recovery from your illness," said he. "I know your complaint arose from being too sharp-sighted, and in this case it has entirely failed. I happen to have a most unusual shadow. Have you not seen a person who is always at my side? Persons often give their servants finer cloth for their liveries than for their own clothes. And so I have dressed out my shadow like a man. Nay, you may observe that I have even given him a shadow of his own. It is rather expensive, but I like to have things about me that are peculiar." "How is this?" thought the princess. "Am I really cured? This must be the best watering place in existence. Water in our times has certainly wonderful power. But I will not leave this place yet, just as it begins to be amusing. This foreign prince, for he must be a prince, pleases me above all things. I only hope his beard won't grow, or he will leave at once." In the evening, the princess and the shadow danced together in the large assembly rooms. She was light, but he was lighter still. She had never seen such a dancer before. She told him from what country she had come, and found he knew it and had been there, but not while she was at home. He had looked into the windows of her father's palace, both the upper and the lower windows. He had seen many things, and could therefore answer the princess and make allusions which quite astonished her. She thought he must be the cleverest man in all the world, and felt the greatest respect for his knowledge. When she danced with him again, she fell in love with him, which the shadow quickly discovered, for she had with her eyes looked him through and through. They danced once more, and she was nearly telling him. But she had some discretion, She thought of her country, her kingdom, and the number of people over whom she would one day have to rule. "He is a clever man," she thought to herself, "which is a good thing, and he dances admirably, which is also good. But has he well-grounded knowledge? That is an important question, and I must try him." Then she asked him a most difficult question. She herself could not have answered it, and the shadow made a most unaccountable grimace. "You cannot answer that," said the princess. "I learned something about it in my childhood," he replied, "and believe that even my very shadow, standing over there by the door, could answer it." "Your shadow?" said the princess. "Indeed, that would be very remarkable." "I do not say so positively," observed the shadow, "but I am inclined to believe that he can do so. He has followed me for so many years, and has heard so much from me, that I think it is very likely. But your Royal Highness must allow me to observe that he is very proud of being considered a man, and to put him in a good humour so that he may answer correctly, he must be treated as a man." "I shall be very pleased to do so," said the princess. So she walked up to the learned man who stood in the doorway and spoke to him of the sun and the moon, of the green forests, and of people near home and far off, and the learned man conversed with her pleasantly and sensibly. What a wonderful man he must be, to have such a clever shadow, thought she. If I were to choose him, it would be a real blessing to my country and my subjects, and I will do it. So the princess and the shadow were soon engaged to each other, but no one was to be told a word about it till she returned to her kingdom. "No one shall know," said the shadow, "not even my own shadow." And he had very particular reasons for saying so. After a time, the princess returned to the land over which she reigned, and the shadow accompanied her. "Listen, my friend," said the shadow to the learned man. "Now that I am as fortunate and as powerful as any man can be, I will do something unusually good for you. You shall live in my palace, drive with me in the royal carriage, and have $100,000 a year. But you must allow everyone to call you a shadow, and never venture to say that you have been a man. And once a year, when I sit in my balcony in the sunshine, you must lie at my feet as becomes a shadow to do, for I must tell you I am going to marry the princess, and our wedding will take place this evening." "Now really, this is too ridiculous," said the learned man. "I cannot and will not submit to such folly. It would be cheating the whole country, and the princess also. I will disclose everything, and say that I am the man, and that you are only a shadow dressed up in men's clothes." "No one would believe you," said the shadow. "Be reasonable now, or I will call the guards." "I will go straight to the princess," said the learned man. "But I shall be there first," replied the shadow, "and you will be sent to prison." And so it turned out, for the guards readily obeyed him, as they knew he was going to marry the king's daughter. "You tremble," said the princess, when the shadow appeared before her. "Has anything happened? You must not be ill today, for this evening our wedding will take place." "I have gone through the most terrible affair that could possibly happen," said the shadow. "Only imagine, my shadow has gone mad. I suppose such a poor, shallow grain could not bear much. He fancies that he has become a real man, and that I am his shadow." "How very terrible!" cried the princess. "Is he locked up?" "Oh yes, certainly, for I fear he will never recover." "Poor shadow," said the princess. "It is very unfortunate for him. It would really be a good deed to free him from his frail existence. And, indeed, when I think how often people take the part of the lower class against the higher, in these days it would be policy to put him out of the way quietly. It is certainly rather hard upon him, for he was a faithful servant," said the shadow, and he pretended to sigh. "Yours is a noble character," said the princess, and bowed herself before him. In the evening the whole town was illuminated, and cannons fired boom, and the soldiers presented arms. It was indeed a grand wedding. The princess and the shadow stepped out on the balcony to show themselves and to receive one cheer more. But the learned man heard nothing of all these festivities, for he had already been executed, the shepherds and the sheep. Have you ever seen an old wooden cupboard quite black with age and ornamented with carved foliage and curious figures? Well, just such a cupboard stood in a parlour and had been left to the family as a legacy by the great-grandmother. It was covered from top to bottom with carved roses and tulips. The most curious scrolls were drawn upon it, and out of them peeped little stags' heads with antlers. In the middle of the cupboard door was the carved figure of a man most ridiculous to look at. He grinned at you, for no one could call it laughing. He had goat's legs, little horns on his head, and a long beard. The children in the room always called him Major General Field Sergeant, Commander Billy Goat's Legs. It was certainly a very difficult name to pronounce, and there are very few who ever receive such a title. But then it seemed wonderful how he came to be carved at all. Yet there he was, always looking at the table under the looking-glass, where stood a very pretty little shepherdess made of china. Her shoes were gilt, and her dress had a red rose or an ornament. She wore a hat and carried a crook. That were both gilded, and looked very bright and pretty. Close by her side stood a little chimney-sweep, as black as coal, and also made of china. He was, however, quite as clean and neat as any other china figure. He only represented a black chimney-sweep, and the china workers might just as well have made him a prince, had they felt inclined to do so. He stood holding his ladder quite handily, and his face was as fair and rosy as a girl's. Indeed, that was rather a mistake. It should have had some black marks on it. He and the shepherdess had been placed close together, side by side, and, being so placed, they became engaged to each other, for they were very well suited, being both made of the same sort of china, and being equally fragile. Close to them stood another figure, 3 times as large as they were, and also made of china. He was an old Chinaman who could nod his head and used to pretend that he was the grandfather of the shepherdess, although he could not prove it. He, however, assumed authority over her, and therefore, when Major General Field Sergeant Commander Billy Goat's Legs asked for the little shepherdess to be his wife, he nodded his head to show that he consented. "You will have a husband," said the old Chinaman to her, "who I really believe is made of mahogany. He will make you a lady of Major General Field Sergeant Commander Billy Goat's Legs. He has the whole cupboard full of silver plate, which he keeps locked up in secret drawers." "I won't go into the dark cupboard," said the little shepherdess. "I have heard that he has 11 china wives there already." "Then you shall be the 12th, said the old Chinaman. "Tonight, as soon as you hear a rattling in the old cupboard, you shall be married, as true as I am a Chinaman." And then he nodded his head and fell asleep. Then the little shepherdess cried and looked at her sweetheart, the china chimney-sweep. "I must entreat you," said she, "to go out with me into the wide world, for we cannot stay here." "I will do whatever you wish," said the little chimney-sweep. "Let us go immediately. I think I shall be able to maintain you with my profession." "If we were but safely down from the table," said she, "I shall not be happy till we are really out in the world." Then he comforted her, and showed her how to place her little foot on the carved edge and gilt-leaf ornaments of the table. He brought his little ladder to help her, and so they contrived to reach the floor. But when they looked at the old cupboard, they saw it was all in an uproar. The carved stags pushed out their heads, raised their antlers, and twisted their necks. The Major General sprung up in the air, and cried out to the old Chinaman, "They are running away! They are running away!" The two were rather frightened at this, so they jumped into the drawer of the window seat. Here were 3 or 4 packs of cards, not quite complete, and a doll's theatre, which had been built up very neatly. A comedy was being performed in it, and all the queens of diamonds, clubs and hearts and spades sat in the first row, fanning themselves with tulips, and behind them stood all the knaves, showing that they had heads above and below, as playing cards generally have. The play was about 2 lovers who were not allowed to marry, and the shepherdess wept because it was so like her own story. "I cannot bear it," said she. "I must get out of the drawer." But when they reached the floor and cast their eyes on the table, there was the old Chinaman awake and shaking his whole body, till all at once down he came on the floor, plump. "The old Chinaman is coming," cried the little shepherdess in a fright, and down she fell on one knee. "I have thought of something," said the chimney sweep. "Let us get into the great pot-pourri jar which stands in the corner. There we can lie on rose leaves and lavender, and throw salt in his eyes if he comes near us." "No, that will never do," said she, "because I know that the Chinaman and the pot-pourri jar were lovers once, and there always remains behind a feeling of goodwill between those who have been so intimate as that. No, there is nothing left for us but to go out into the wide world." "Have you really courage enough to go out into the wide world with me?" said the chimney sweep. "Have you thought how large it is, and that we can never come back here again?" "Yes, I have," she replied. When the chimney sweep saw that she was quite firm, he said, "My way is through the stove and up the chimney. Have you courage to creep with me through the firebox and the iron pipe? When we get to the chimney, I shall know how to manage very well. We shall soon climb too high for anyone to reach us, and we shall come through a hole in the top out into the wide world." So he led her to the door of the stove. "It looks very dark," said she. Still she went in with him through the stove and through the pipe, where it was as dark as pitch. "Now we are in the chimney," said he, "and look, there is a beautiful star shining above it." It was a real star, shining down upon them as if it would show them the way. So they clambered and crept on, and a frightful steep place it was, but the chimney sweep helped her and supported her, till they got higher and higher. He showed her the best places on which to set her little china foot. So at last they reached the top of the chimney and sat themselves down, for they were very tired, as may be supposed. The sky, with all its stars, was over their heads, and below were the roofs of the town. They could see for a very long distance out into the wide world, and the poor little shepherdess leaned her head on her chimney-sweep's shoulder, and wept till she washed the gilt off her sash. The world was so different to what she expected. "This is too much," she said. "I cannot bear it. The world is too large. Oh, I wish I were safe back on the table again, under the looking-glass. I shall never be happy till I am safe back again. Now I have followed you out into the wide world, you will take me back if you love me." Then the chimney-sweep tried to reason with her, and spoke of the old Chinaman, and of the Major General Field Sergeant Commander Billy-Goat's legs, but she sobbed so bitterly and kissed her little chimney-sweep till he was obliged to do all she asked, foolish as it was. And so, with a great deal of trouble, they climbed down the chimney, and then crept through the pipe and stove, which were certainly not very pleasant places. Then they stood in the dark firebox, and listened behind the door to hear what was going on in the room. As it was all quiet, they peeped out. Alas! There lay the old Chinaman on the floor. He had fallen down from the table as he attempted to run after them, and was broken into 3 pieces. His back had separated entirely, and his head had rolled into a corner of the room. The Major General stood in his old place and appeared lost in thought. "This is terrible," said the little shepherdess. "My poor old grandfather is broken to pieces, and it is our fault. I shall never live after this." And she wrung her little hands. "He can be riveted," said the chimney-sweep. "He can be riveted. Do not be so hasty. If they cement his back and put a good rivet in it, he will be as good as new, and be able to say as many disagreeable things to us as ever." "Do you think so?" said she. And then they climbed up to the table and stood in their old places. "As we have done no good," said the chimney-sweep, "we might as well have remained here, instead of taking so much trouble." "I wish grandfather was riveted," said the shepherdess. "Will it cost much, I wonder?" And she had her wish. The family had the Chinaman's back mended, and a strong rivet put through his neck. He looked as good as new, but he could no longer nod his head. "You have become proud since your fall broke you to pieces," said Major General Field Sergeant Commander Billygoat's Legs. "You have no reason to give yourself such airs. Am I to have her or not?" The chimney-sweep and the little shepherdess looked piteously at the old Chinaman, for they were afraid he might nod, but he was not able. Besides, it was so tiresome to be always telling strangers he had a rivet in the back of his neck. And so the little China people remained together, and were glad of the grandfather's rivet, and continued to love each other till they were broken to pieces. The shepherd's story of the bond of friendship. The little dwelling in which we lived was of clay, but the doorposts were columns of fluted marble, found near the spot on which it stood. The roof sloped nearly to the ground. It was at this time dark, brown, and ugly, but had originally been formed of blooming olive and laurel branches brought from beyond the mountains. The house was situated in a narrow gorge, whose rocky walls rose to a perpendicular height, naked and black, while round their summits clouds often hung, looking like white living figures. Not a singing bird was ever heard there, neither did men dance to the sound of the pipe. The spot was one sacred to olden times. Even its name recalled a memory of the days when it was called Delphi. Then the summits of the dark, sacred mountains were covered with snow, and the highest, Mount Parnassus, glowed longest in the red evening light. The brook which rolled from it near our house was also sacred. How well I can remember every spot in that deep, sacred solitude. A fire had been kindled in the midst of the hut, and while the hot ashes lay there red and glowing, the bread was baked in them. At times the snow would be piled so high around our hut as almost to hide it, and then my mother appeared most cheerful. She would hold my head between her hands, and sing the songs she never sang at other times, for the Turks, our masters, would not allow it. She sang, "On the summit of Mount Olympus, in a forest of dwarf firs, lay an old stag. His eyes were heavy with tears, and glittering with colours like dewdrops, and there came by a roebuck, and said, 'What ailest thee, that thou weepest blue and red tears?' And the stag answered, 'The Turk has come to our city. He has wild dogs for the chase, a goodly pack.' 'I will drive them away across the islands,' cried the young roebuck. 'I will drive them away across the islands into the deep sea.' But before evening the roebuck was slain, and before night the hunted stag was dead. And when my mother sang thus, her eyes would become moist, and on the long eyelashes were tears, but she concealed them and watched the black bread baking in the ashes. Then I would clench my fist and cry, 'We will kill these Turks.' But she repeated the words of the song, 'I will drive them across the islands to the deep sea.' But before evening came, the roebuck was slain, and before the night the hunted stag was dead. We had been lonely in our hut for several days and nights when my father came home. I knew he would bring me some shells from the Gulf of Lepanto, or perhaps a knife with a shining blade. This time he brought, under his sheepskin cloak, a little child, a little half-naked girl. She was wrapped in a fur, but when this was taken off and she lay in my mother's lap, 3 silver coins were found, fastened in her dark hair. They were all her possessions. My father told us that the child's parents had been killed by the Turks, and he talked so much about them that I dreamed of Turks all night. He himself had been wounded, and my mother bound up his arm. It was a deep wound, and the thick sheepskin cloak was stiff with congealed blood. The little maiden was to be my sister. How pretty and bright she looked! Even my mother's eyes were not more gentle than hers. Anastasia, as she was called, was to be my sister, because her father had been united to mine by an old custom, which we still follow. They had sworn brotherhood in their youth, and the most beautiful and virtuous maiden in the neighborhood was chosen to perform the act of consecration upon this bond of friendship. So now, this little girl was my sister. She sat in my lap, and I brought her flowers and feathers from the birds of the mountain. We drank together of the waters of Parnassus, and dwelt for many years beneath the laurel roof of the hut, while, winter after winter, my mother sang her song of the stag who shed red tears. But as yet I did not understand that the sorrows of my own countrymen were mirrored in those tears. One day there came to our hut Franks, men from a far country, whose dress was different to ours. They had tents and beds with them, carried by horses, and they were accompanied by more than 20 Turks, all armed with swords and muskets. These Franks were friends of the Pacha, and had letters from him commanding an escort for them. They only came to see our mountain, to ascend Parnassus amid the snow and clouds, and to look at the strange black rocks which raised their steep sides near our hut. They could not find room in the hut, nor endure the smoke that rolled along the ceiling till it found its way out at the low door. So they pitched their tents on a small space outside our dwelling. Roasted lambs and birds were brought forth, and strong, sweet wine, of which the Turks are forbidden to partake. When they departed, I accompanied them for some distance, carrying my little sister Anastasia, wrapped in a goatskin, on my back. One of the Frankish gentlemen made me stand in front of a rock, and drew us both as we stood there, so that we looked like one creature. I did not think of it then, but Anastasia and I were really one. She was always sitting on my lap, or riding in the goatskin on my back, and in my dreams she always appeared to me. 2 nights after this, other men, armed with knives and muskets, came into our tent. They were Albanians, brave men, my mother told me. They only stayed a short time. My sister Anastasia sat on the knee of one of them, and when they were gone she had not 3 but 2 silver coins in her hair. One had disappeared. They wrapped tobacco in strips of paper and smoked it, and I remember they were uncertain as to the road they ought to take. But they were obliged to go at last, and my father went with them. Soon after we heard the sound of firing. The noise continued, and presently soldiers rushed into our hut, and took my mother, and myself, and Anastasia prisoners. They declared that we had entertained robbers, and that my father had acted as their guide, and therefore we must now go with them. The corpses of the robbers and my father's corpse were brought into the hut. I saw my poor dead father, and cried till I fell asleep. When I awoke, I found myself in a prison, but the room was not worse than our own in the hut. They gave me onions and musty wine from a tarred cask, but we were not accustomed to much better fare at home. How long we were kept in prison, I do not know, but many days and nights passed by. We were set free about Easter time. I carried Anastasia on my back, and we walked very slowly, for my mother was very weak, and it is a long way to the sea, to the Gulf of Lepanto. On our arrival, we entered a church, in which there were beautiful pictures in golden frames. They were pictures of angels, fair and bright, and yet our little Anastasia looked equally beautiful, as it seemed to me. In the center of the floor stood a coffin filled with roses. My mother told me it was the Lord Jesus Christ who was represented by these roses. Then the priest announced, "Christ is risen," and all the people greeted each other. Each one carried a burning taper in his hand, and one was given to me as well as to little Anastasia. The music sounded, and the people left the church hand in hand with joy and gladness. Outside, the women were roasting the paschal lamb. We were invited to partake, and as I sat by the fire, a boy, older than myself, put his arms round my neck and kissed me, and said, "Christ is risen." And thus it was that for the first time I met Uptonides. My mother could make fishermen's nets, for which there was a great demand here in the bay, and we lived a long time by the side of the sea, the beautiful sea that had a taste like tears, and in its colours reminded me of the stag that wept red tears, for sometimes its waters were red and sometimes green or blue. Aphtanides knew how to manage our boat, and I often sat in it with my little Anastasia while it glided on through the water, swift as a bird flying through the air. Then, when the sun set, how beautifully, deeply blue, would be the tint on the mountains, one rising above the other in the far distance, and the summit of Mount Parnassus rising above them all like a glorious crown. Its top glittered in the evening rays like molten gold, and it seemed as if the light came from within it, for long after the sun had sunk beneath the horizon, the mountain top would glow in the clear blue sky. The white aquatic birds skimmed the surface of the water in their flight, and all was calm and still as amid the black rocks at Delphi. I lay on my back in the boat. Anastasia leaned against me, while the stars above us glittered more brightly than the lamps in our church. They were the same stars, and in the same position over me as when I used to sit in front of our hut at Delphi, and I had almost begun to fancy I was still there, when suddenly there was a splash in the water. Anastasia had fallen in, but in a moment Aphtanides had sprung in after her, and was now holding her up to me. We dried her clothes as well as we were able, and remained on the water till they were dry, for we did not wish it to be known what a fright we had had, nor the danger which our little adopted sister had incurred, in whose life Aphtanides had now a part. The summer came, and the burning heat of the sun tinted the leaves of the trees with lines of gold. I thought of our cool mountain home and the fresh water that flowed near it. My mother, too, longed for if, and one evening we wandered towards home. How peaceful and silent it was as we walked on through the thick, wild thyme, still fragrant though the sun had scorched the leaves. Not a single herdsman did we meet, not a solitary hut did we pass. Everything appeared lonely and deserted. Only a shooting star showed that in the heavens there was yet life. I know not whether the clear, blue atmosphere gleamed with its own light, or if the radiance came from the stars, but we could distinguish quite plainly the outline of the mountains. My mother lighted a fire, and roasted some roots she had brought with her, and I and my little sister slept among the bushes, without fear of the ugly Smidraki, from whose throat issues fire, or of the wolf and the jackal, for my mother sat by us, and I considered her presence sufficient protection. We reached our old home, but the cottage was in ruins, and we had to build a new one. With the aid of some neighbours, chiefly women, the walls were in a few days erected, and very soon covered with a roof of olive branches. My mother obtained a living by making bottle cases of bark and skins, and I kept the sheep belonging to the priests, who were sometimes peasants, while I had for my playfellows Anastasia and the turtles. Once our beloved Aphtanides paid us a visit. He said he had been longing to see us so much, and he remained with us 2 whole happy days. A month afterwards he came again to wish us goodbye, and brought with him a large fish for my mother. He told us he was going in a ship to Corfu and Patras, and could relate a great many stories, not only about the fishermen who lived near the Gulf of Lepanto, but also of kings and heroes who had once possessed Greece, just as the Turks possess it now. I have seen a bud on a rose bush gradually, in the course of a few weeks, unfold its leaves till it became a rose in all its beauty, and, before I was aware of it, I beheld it blooming in rosy loveliness. The same thing had happened to Anastasia. Unnoticed by me, she had gradually become a beautiful maiden, and I was now also a stout, strong youth. The wolf skins that covered the bed in which my mother and Anastasia slept had been taken from wolves which I had myself shot. Years had gone by when, one evening, Aphtanides came in. He had grown tall and slender as a reed, with strong limbs and a dark brown skin. He kissed us all, and had so much to tell of what he had seen of the great ocean, of the fortifications at Malta, and of the marvelous sepulchres of Egypt, that I looked up to him with a kind of veneration. His stories were as strange as the legends of the priests of olden times. "How much you know!" I exclaimed, "and what wonders you can relate!" "I think what you once told me the finest of all," he replied. "You told me of a thing that has never been out of my thoughts, of the good old custom of the bond of friendship, a custom I should like to follow. Brother, let you and I go to church, as your father and Anastasia's father once did. Your sister Anastasia is the most beautiful and most innocent of maidens, and she shall consecrate the deed. No people have such grand old customs as we Greeks." Anastasia blushed like a young rose, and my mother kissed Aphtanides. At about 2 miles from our cottage, where the earth on the hill is sheltered by a few scattered trees, stood the little church, with a silver lamp hanging before the altar. I put on my best clothes, and the white tunic fell in graceful folds over my hips. The red jacket fitted tight and close. The tassel on my fez cap was of silver, and in my girdle glittered a knife and my pistols. Aphtanides was clad in the blue dress worn by the Greek sailors. On his breast hung a silver medal with the figure of the Virgin Mary, and his scarf was as costly as those worn by rich lords. Everyone could see that we were about to perform a solemn ceremony. When we entered the little unpretending church, the evening sunlight streamed through the open door on the burning lamp and glittered on the golden picture frames. We knelt down together on the altar steps, and Anastasia drew near and stood beside us. A long white garment fell in graceful folds over her delicate form, and on her white neck and bosom hung a chain entwined with old and new coins, forming a kind of collar. Her black hair was fastened into a knot, and confined by a headdress formed of gold and silver coins, which had been found in an ancient temple. No Greek girl had more beautiful ornaments than these. Her countenance glowed, and her eyes were like 2 stars. We all 3 offered a silent prayer, and then she said to us, "Will you be friends in life and in death?" "Yes," we replied. "Will you each remember to say, 'Whatever may happen, my brother is a part of myself. His secret is my secret. My happiness is his. Self-sacrifice, patience, everything belongs to me as they do to him?'" And we again answered, "Yes." Then she joined out hands and kissed us on the forehead, and we again prayed silently. After this, a priest came through a door near the altar and blessed us all 3. Then a song was sung by other holy men behind the altar screen, and the bond of eternal friendship was confirmed. When we arose, I saw my mother standing by the church door, weeping. How cheerful everything seemed now in our little cottage by the Delphian springs. On the evening before his departure, Aftanides sat thoughtfully beside me on the slopes of the mountain. His arm was flung around me, and mine was round his neck. We spoke of the sorrows of Greece and of the men of the country who could be trusted. Every thought of our souls lay clear before us. Presently I seized his hand. "Aftanides," I exclaimed, "there is one thing still that you must know. One thing that till now has been a secret between myself and heaven. My whole soul is filled with love, with a love stronger than the love I bear to my mother and to thee." "And whom do you love?" asked Aftanides, and his face and neck grew red as fire. "I love Anastasia," I replied. Then his hand trembled in mine, and he became pale as a corpse. I saw it. I understood the cause, and I believe my hand trembled too. I bent towards him, I kissed his forehead and whispered, "I have never spoken of this to her. And perhaps she does not love me. Brother, think of this. I have seen her daily. She has grown up beside me and has become a part of my soul." "And she shall be thine," he exclaimed. "Thine! I may not wrong thee, nor will I do so. I also love her, but tomorrow I depart. In a year we will see each other again, but then you will be married, shall it not be so? I have a little gold of my own. It shall be yours. You must and shall take it." We wandered silently homeward across the mountains. It was late in the evening when we reached my mother's door. Anastasia held the lamp as we entered. My mother was not there. She looked at Aftanides with a sweet but mournful expression on her face. "Tomorrow you are going to leave us," she said. "I am very sorry." "Sorry?" he exclaimed, and his voice was troubled with a grief as deep as my own. I could not speak, but he seized her hand and said, "Our brother yonder loves you. And is he not dear to you? His very silence now proves his affection." Anastasia trembled and burst into tears. Then I saw no one, thought of none, but her. I threw my arms round her and pressed my lips to hers. As she flung her arms round my neck, the lamp fell to the ground, and we were in darkness, dark as the heart of poor Aftanides. Before daybreak he rose, kissed us all, and said, "Farewell," and went away. He had given all his money to my mother for us. Anastasia was betrothed to me, and in a few days afterwards she became my wife. The shed. Colour. There was once a fine gentleman who possessed, among other things, a boot-jack and a hairbrush, but he had also the finest shirt-collar in the world. And of this collar we are about to hear a story. The collar had become so old that he began to think about getting married, and one day he happened to find himself in the same washing tub as a garter. "Upon my word," said the shirt-collar, "I have never seen anything so slim and delicate, so neat and soft before. May I venture to ask your name?" "I shall not tell you," replied the garter. "Where do you reside when you are at home?" asked the shirt-collar. But the garter was naturally shy, and did not know how to answer such a question. "I presume you are a girdle," said the shirt-collar, "a sort of undergirdle. I see that you are useful, as well as ornamental, my little lady." "You must not speak to me," said the garter. "I do not think I have given you any encouragement to do so." "Oh, when anyone is as beautiful as you are," said the shirt-collar, "is not that encouragement enough?" "Get away, don't come so near me," said the garter. "You appear to me quite like a man." "I am a fine gentleman, certainly," said the shirt-collar. "I possess a boot-jack and a hairbrush." This was not true, for these things belonged to his master, but he was a boaster. "Don't come so near me," said the garter. "I am not accustomed to it." "Affectation," said the shirt collar. Then they were taken out of the wash-tub, starched, and hung over a chair in the sunshine, and then laid on the ironing board. And now came the glowing iron. "Mistress Widow," said the shirt collar, "little Mistress Widow, I feel quite warm. I am changing. I am losing all my creases. You are burning a hole in me. Ugh, I propose to you." "You old rag," said the flat iron, driving proudly over the collar, for she fancied herself a steam engine which rolls over the railway and draws carriages. "You old rag," said she. The edges of the shirt collar were a little frayed, so the scissors were brought to cut them smooth. "Oh," exclaimed the shirt collar, "what a first-rate dancer you would make! You can stretch out your legs so well. I never saw anything so charming. I am sure no human being could do the same." "I should think not," replied the scissors. "You ought to be a countess," said the shirt collar. "But all I possess consists of a fine gentleman, a bootjack, and a comb. I wish I had an estate for your sake." "What? Is he going to propose to me?" said the scissors, and she became so angry that she'd cut too sharply into the shirt collar, and it was obliged to be thrown by as useless. "I shall be obliged to propose to the hairbrush," thought the shirt collar, so he remarked one day, "It is wonderful what beautiful hair you have, my little lady. Had you never thought of being engaged?" "You might know I should think of it," answered the hairbrush. "I am engaged to the bootjack." "Engaged!" cried the shirt collar. "Now there is no one left to propose to." And then he pretended to despise all love-making. A long time passed, and the shirt collar was taken in a bag to the paper mill. Here was a large company of rags, the fine ones lying by themselves, separated from the coarser, as it ought to be. They had all many things to relate, especially the shirt collar, who was a terrible boaster. "I have had an immense number of love affairs," said the shirt collar. "No one left me any peace. It is true, I was a very fine gentleman, quite stuck up. I had a bootjack and a brush that I never used. You should have seen me then, when I was turned down. I shall never forget my first love. She was a girdle, so charming and fine and soft, and she threw herself into a washing tub for my sake. There was a widow, too, who was warmly in love with me, but I left her alone, and she became quite black. The next was a first-rate dancer. She gave me the wound from which I still suffer. She was so passionate. Even my own hairbrush was in love with me, and lost all her hair through neglected love. Yes, I have had great experience of this kind, but my greatest grief was for the garter, the girdle I meant to say, that jumped into the wash-tub. I have a great deal on my conscience, and it is really time I should be turned into white paper." And the shirt collar came to this at last. All the rags were made into white paper, and the shirt collar became the very identical piece of paper which we now see, and on which this story is printed. It happened as a punishment to him for having boasted so shockingly of things which were not true. And this is a warning to us to be careful how we act, for we may some day find ourselves in the rag bag to be turned into white paper, on which our whole history may be written, even its most secret actions. And it would not be pleasant to have to run about the world in the form of a piece of paper, telling everything we have done, like the boasting shirt collar, the silver shilling. There was once a shilling which came forth from the mint springing and shouting, "Hurrah! Now I am going out into the wide world." And truly it did go out into the wide world. The children held it with warm hands, the miser with a cold and convulsive grasp, and the old people turned it about, goodness knows how many times, while the young people soon allowed it to roll away from them. The shilling was made of silver. It contained very little copper, and considered itself quite out in the world when it had been circulated for a year in the country in which it had been coined. One day it really did go out into the world, for it belonged to a gentleman who was about to travel in foreign lands. This gentleman was not aware that the shilling lay at the bottom of his purse when he started, till he one day found it between his fingers. "Why," cried he, "here is a shilling from home. Well, it must go on its travels with me now." And the shilling jumped and rattled for joy when it was put back again into the purse. Here it lay among a number of foreign companions who were always coming and going, one taking the place of another. But the shilling from home was always put back and had to remain in the purse, which was certainly a mark of distinction. Many weeks passed, during which the shilling had travelled a long distance in the purse without in the least knowing where he was. He had found out that the other coins were French and Italian, and one coin said they were in this town, and another said they were in that, but the shilling was unable to make out or imagine what they meant. A man certainly cannot see much of the world if he is tied up in a bag, and this was really the shilling's fate. But one day, as he was lying in the purse, he noticed that it was not quite closed, and so he slipped near to the opening to have a little peep into society. He certainly had not the least idea of what would follow, but he was curious, and curiosity often brings its own punishment. In his eagerness, he came so near the edge of the purse that he slipped out into the pocket of the trousers, and when, in the evening, the purse was taken out, the shilling was left behind in the corner to which it had fallen. As the clothes were being carried into the hall, the shilling fell out on the floor, unheard and unnoticed by anyone. The next morning, the clothes were taken back to the room. The gentleman put them on and started on his journey again, but the shilling remained behind on the floor. After a time it was found, and being considered a good coin, was placed with 3 other coins. "Ah," thought the shilling, "this is pleasant. I shall now see the world, become acquainted with other people, and learn other customs." "Do you call that a shilling?" said someone the next moment. "That is not a genuine coin of the country. It is false. It is good for nothing." Now begins the story as it was afterwards related by the shilling himself. "False, good for nothing," said he. That remark went through and through me like a dagger. I knew that I had a true ring, and that mine was a genuine stamp. These people must, at all events, be wrong, or they could not mean me. But yes, I was the one they called false and good for nothing. "Then I must pay it away in the dark," said the man who had received me. So I was to be got rid of in the darkness, and be again insulted in broad daylight. "False, good for nothing!" Oh, I must contrive to get lost, thought I, and I trembled between the fingers of the people every time they tried to pass me off slyly as a coin of the country. Ah, unhappy shilling that I was! Of what use were my silver, my stamp, and my real value here, where all these qualities were worthless? In the eyes of the world, a man is valued just according to the opinion formed of him. It must be a shocking thing to have a guilty conscience, and to be sneaking about on account of wicked deeds. As for me, innocent as I was, I could not help shuddering before their eyes whenever they brought me out, for I knew I should be thrown back again up the table as a false pretender. At length I was paid away to a poor old woman, who received me as wages for a hard day's work. But she could not again get rid of me. No one would take me. I was to the woman a most unlucky shilling. "I am positively obliged to pass this shilling to somebody," said she. "I cannot, with the best intentions, lay by a bad shilling. The rich baker shall have it. He can bear the loss better than I can, but after all, it is not a right thing to do." "Ah," sighed I to myself. Am I also to be a burden on the conscience of this poor woman? Am I then in my old days so completely changed? The woman offered me to the rich baker, but he knew the current money too well, and as soon as he received me, he threw me almost in the woman's face. She could get no bread for me, and I felt quite grieved to the heart that I should be cause of so much trouble to another, and be treated as a cast-off coin. I, who, in my young days, felt so joyful in the certainty of my own value, and knew so well that I bore a genuine stamp, I was as sorrowful now as a poor shilling can be when nobody will have him. The woman took me home again with her, and looking at me very earnestly, she said, "No, I will not try to deceive anyone with thee again. I will bore a hole through thee, that everyone may know that thou art a false and worthless thing. And yet, why should I do that? Very likely thou art a lucky shilling. A thought has just struck me that it is so, and I believe it. Yes, I will make a hole in the shilling," said she, "and run a string through it, and then give it to my neighbour's little one to hang round her neck, as a lucky shilling." So she drilled a hole through me. It is really not at all pleasant to have a hole bored through one, but we can submit to a great deal when it is done with a good intention. A string was drawn through the hole, and I became a kind of medal. They hung me round the neck of a little child, and the child laughed at me and kissed me, and I rested for one whole night on the warm, innocent breast of a child. In the morning, the child's mother took me between her fingers and had certain thoughts about me, which I very soon found out. First, she looked for a pair of scissors and cut the string. "Lucky shilling," said she. "Certainly, this is what I mean to try." Then she laid me in vinegar till I became quite green, and after that she filled up the hole with cement, rubbed me a little to brighten me up, and went out in the twilight hour to the lottery collector to buy herself a ticket with a shilling that should bring luck. How everything seemed to cause me trouble. The lottery collector pressed me so hard that I thought I should crack. I had been called false, I had been thrown away. That I knew. And there were many shillings and coins with inscriptions and stamps of all kinds lying about. I well knew how proud they were, so I avoided them from very shame. With the collector were several men who seemed to have a great deal to do, so I fell unnoticed into a chest among several other coins. Whether the lottery ticket gained a prize, I know not, but this I know, that in a very few days after, I was recognized as a bad shilling, and laid aside. Everything that happened seemed always to add to my sorrow. Even if a man has a good character, it is of no use for him to deny what is said of him, for he is not considered an impartial judge of himself. A year passed, and in this way I had been changed from hand to hand, always abused, always looked at with displeasure, and trusted by no one, but I trusted in myself, and had no confidence in the world. Yes, that was a very dark time. At length, one day, I was passed to a traveller, a foreigner, the very same who had brought me away from home, and he was simple and true-hearted enough to take me for current coin. But would he also attempt to pass me? And should I again hear the outcry, "False, good for nothing"? The traveller examined me attentively. "I took thee for good coin," said he. Then suddenly a smile spread all over his face. I have never seen such a smile on any other face as on his. "Now this is singular," said he. "It is a coin from my own country, a good, true shilling from home. Someone has bored a hole through it, and people have no doubt called it false. How curious that it should come into my hands. I will take it home with me to my own house." Joy thrilled through me when I heard this. I had been once more called a good, honest shilling, and I was to go back to my own home, where each and all would recognize me and know that I was made of good silver and bore a true, genuine stamp. I should have been glad in my joy to throw out sparks of fire, but it has never at any time been my nature to sparkle. Steel can do so, but not silver. I was wrapped up in fine white paper that I might not mix with the other coins and be lost, and on special occasions, when people from my own country happened to be present, I was brought forward and spoken of very kindly. They said I was very interesting, and it was really quite worthwhile to notice that those who are interesting have often not a single word to say for themselves. At length I reached home. All my cares were at an end. Joy again overwhelmed me, for was I not good silver, and had I not a genuine stamp? I had no more insults or disappointments to endure, although, indeed, there was a hole through me, as if I were false. But suspicions are nothing when a man is really true, and everyone should persevere in acting honestly, for and will be made right in time. That is my firm belief, said the shilling, the snail and the rose. Tree, round about the garden ran a hedge of hazel bushes. Beyond the hedge were fields and meadows with cows and sheep, but in the middle of the garden stood a rose tree in bloom, under which sat a snail, whose shell contained a great deal, that is, himself. Only wait till my time comes, he said. I shall do more than grow roses, bear nuts, or give milk like the hazel bush, the cows, and the sheep. I expect a great deal from you, said the rose tree. May I ask when it will appear? I take my time, said the snail. You're always in such a hurry. That does not excite expectation. The following year, the snail lay in almost the same spot, in the sunshine under the rose tree, which was again budding and bearing roses as fresh and beautiful as ever. The snail crept half out of his shell, stretched out his horns, and drew them in again. Everything is just as it was last year. No progress at all. The rose tree sticks to its roses and gets no farther. The summer and the autumn passed. The rose tree bore roses and buds till the snow fell and the weather became raw and wet. Then it bent down its head, and the snail crept into the ground. A new year began. The roses made their appearance, and the snail made his too. You are an old rose tree now, said the snail. You must make haste and die. You have given the world all that you had in you. Whether it was of much importance is a question that I have not had time to think about. But this much is clear and plain, that you have not done the least for your inner development, or you would have produced something else. Have you anything to say in defense? You will now soon be nothing but a stick. Do you understand what I say? You frighten me, said the rose tree. I have never thought of that. No, you have never taken the trouble to think at all. Have you ever given yourself an account why you bloomed, and how your blooming comes about? Why, just in that way and in no other? No, said the rose tree. I bloom in gladness, because I cannot do otherwise. The sun shone and warmed me, and the air refreshed me. I drank the clear dew and the invigorating rain. I breathed, and I lived. Out of the earth there arose a power within me, whilst from above I also received strength. I felt an ever-renewed and ever-increasing happiness, and therefore I was obliged to go on blooming. That was my life. I could not do otherwise. You have led a very easy life, remarked the snail. Certainly. Everything was given me, said the rose tree. But still more was given to you. Yours is one of those deep-thinking natures, one of those highly gifted minds that astonishes the world. I have not the slightest intention of doing so, said the snail. The world is nothing to me. What have I to do with the world? I have enough to do with myself, and enough in myself. But must we not all here on earth give up our best parts to others, and offer as much as lies in our power? It is true, I have only given roses. But you who are so richly endowed, what have you given to the world? What will you give it? What have I given? What am I going to give? I spit at it. It's good for nothing and does not concern me. For my part, you may go on bearing roses. You cannot do anything else. Let the hazel bush bear nuts and the cows and sheep give milk. They have each their public. I have mine in myself. I retire within myself, and there I stop. The world is nothing to me. With this, the snail withdrew into his house and blocked up the entrance. That's very sad, said the rose tree. I cannot creep into myself, however much I might wish to do so. I have to go on bearing roses. Then they drop their leaves, which are blown away by the wind. But I once saw how a rose was laid in the mistress's hymn book, and how one of my roses found a place in the bosom of a young, beautiful girl, and how another was kissed by the lips of a child in the glad joy of life. That did me good. It was a real blessing. Those are my recollections, my life. And the rose tree went on blooming in innocence, while the snail lay idling in his house. The world was nothing to him. Years passed by. The snail had turned to earth in the earth, and the rose tree too. Even the souvenir rose in the hymn book was faded, but in the garden there were other rose trees and other snails. The latter crept into their houses and spat at the world, for it did not concern them. Shall we read the story all over again? It will be just the same. The Snowman. It is so delightfully cold, said the Snowman, that it makes my whole body crackle. This is just the kind of wind to blow life into one. How that great red thing up there is staring at me! He meant the sun, who was just setting. It shall not make me wink. I shall manage to keep the pieces. He had 2 triangular pieces of tile in his head, instead of eyes. His mouth was made of an old broken rake, and was, of course, furnished with teeth. He had been brought into existence amidst the joyous shouts of boys, the jingling of sleigh bells, and the slashing of whips. The sun went down, and the full moon rose, large, round, and clear, shining in the deep blue. "There it comes again from the other side," said the Snowman, who supposed the sun was showing himself once more. "Ah, I have cured him of staring, though. Now he may hang up there and shine, that I may see myself. If I only knew how to manage to move away from this place, I should so like to move. If I could, I would slide along yonder on the ice, as I have seen the boys do, but I don't understand how. I don't even know how to run." "Away, away!" barked the old yard dog. He was quite hoarse, and could not pronounce bow wow properly. He had once been an indoor dog, and lay by the fire, and he had been hoarse ever since. The sun will make you run some day. I saw him last winter make your predecessor run, and his predecessor before him. Away, away, they all have to go. "I don't understand you, comrade," said the Snowman. "Is that thing up yonder to teach me to run?" "I saw it running itself a little while ago, and now it has come creeping up from the other side." "You know nothing at all," replied the yard dog. "But then you've only lately been patched up. What you see yonder is the moon, and the one before it was the sun. It will come again tomorrow, and most likely teach you to run down into the ditch by well, for I think the weather is going to change. I can feel such pricks and stabs in my left leg. I am sure there is going to be a change." "I don't understand him," said the Snowman to himself, "but I have a feeling that he is talking of something very disagreeable. The one who stared so just now, and whom he calls the sun, is not my friend. I can feel that too." "Away! Away!" barked the yard dog, and then he turned round 3 times and crept into his kennel to sleep. There was really a change in the weather. Towards morning, a thick fog covered the whole country round, and a keen wind arose, so that the cold seemed to freeze one's bones. But when the sun rose, the sight was splendid. Trees and bushes were covered with hoar-frost and looked like a forest of white coral, while on every twig glittered frozen dewdrops. The many delicate forms concealed in summer by luxuriant foliage were now clearly defined and looked like glittering lacework. From every twig glistened a white radiance. The birch, waving in the wind, looked full of life, like trees in summer, and its appearance was wondrously beautiful. And where the sun shone, how everything glittered and sparkled as if diamond dust had been strewn about, while the snowy carpet of the earth appeared as if covered with diamonds, from which countless lights gleamed, whiter than even the snow itself. "This is really beautiful," said a young girl, who had come into the garden with a young man, and they both stood still near the snowman and contemplated the glittering scene. "Summer cannot show a more beautiful sight," she exclaimed, while her eyes sparkled. "And we can't have such a fellow as this in the summer-time," replied the young man, pointing to the snowman. "He is capital." The girl laughed and nodded at the snowman, and then tripped away over the snow with her friend. The snow creaked and crackled beneath her feet, as if she had been treading on starch. "Who are these two?" asked the snowman of the yard dog. "You have been here longer than I have. Do you know them?" "Of course I know them," replied the yard dog. "She has stroked my back many times, and he has given me a bone of meat. I never bite those two." "But what are they?" asked the snowman. "They are lovers," he replied. "They will go and live in the same kennel by and by, and gnaw at the same bone." "Away, away!" "Are they the same kind of beings as you and I?" asked the snowman. "Well, they belong to the same master," retorted the yard dog. "Certainly people who were only born yesterday know very little. I can see that in you. I have age and experience. I know everyone here in the house, and I know there was once a time when I did not lie out here in the cold fastened to a chain. Away, away!" "The cold is delightful," said the snowman. "But do tell me, only you must not clank your chain so, for it jars all through me when you do that." "Away, away!" barked the yard dog. "I'll tell you. They said I was a pretty little fellow once. Then I used to lie in a velvet-covered chair up at the master's house and sit in the mistress's lap. They used to kiss my nose and wipe my paws with an embroidered handkerchief, and I was called Ami, dear Ami, sweet Ami. But after a while I grew too big for them, and they sent me away to the housekeeper's room. So I came to live on the lower story. You can look into the room from where you stand and see where I was master once, for I was indeed master to the housekeeper. It was certainly a smaller room than those upstairs, but I was more comfortable, for I was not being continually taken hold of and pulled about by the children as I had been. I received quite as good food, or even better. I had my own cushion, and there was a stove. It is the finest thing in the world at this season of the year. I used to go under the stove and lie down quite beneath it. Ah, I still dream of that stove. Away, away!" "Does a stove look beautiful?" asked the snowman. "Is it at all like me?" "It is just the reverse of you," said the dog. "It's as black as a crow, and has a long neck and a brass knob. It eats firewood, so that fire spurts out of its mouth. We should keep on one side or under it to be comfortable. You can see it through the window from where you stand." Then the snowman looked and saw a bright, polished thing with a brazen knob and fire gleaming from the lower part of it. The snowman felt quite a strange sensation come over him. It was very odd. He knew not what it meant, and he could not account for it. But there are people who are not men of snow, who understand what it is." "And why did you leave her?" asked the snowman, for it seemed to him that the stove must be of the female sex. "How could you give up such a comfortable place?" "I was obliged," replied the yard dog. "They turned me out of doors and chained me up here. I had bitten the youngest of my master's sons in the leg because he kicked away the bone I was gnawing. Bone for bone, I thought. But they were so angry, and from that time I have been fastened with a chain and lost my bone. Don't you hear how hoarse I am? Away, away, I can't talk any more like other dogs. Away, away, that is the end of it all." But the snowman was no longer listening. He was looking into the housekeeper's room on the lower story, where the stove stood on its 4 iron legs, looking about the same size as the snowman himself. "What a strange crackling I feel within me," he said. "Shall I ever get in there?" It is an innocent wish, and innocent wishes are sure to be fulfilled. I must go in there and lean against her, even if I have to break the window. "You must never go in there," said the yard dog, "for if you approach the stove, you'll melt away, away." "I might as well go," said the snowman, "for I think I am breaking up as it is." During the whole day the snowman stood looking in through the window, and in the twilight hour the room became still more inviting, for from the stove came a gentle glow, not like the sun or the moon, no, only the bright light which gleams from a stove when it has been well fed. When the door of the stove was opened, the flames darted out of its mouth. This is customary with all stoves. The light of the flames fell directly on the face and breast of the snowman with a ruddy gleam. "I can endure it no longer," said he. "How beautiful it looks when it stretches out its tongue." The night was long, but did not appear so to the snowman, who stood there enjoying his own reflections and crackling with the cold. In the morning, the window panes of the housekeeper's room were covered with ice. They were the most beautiful ice flowers any snowman could desire, but they concealed the stove. These window panes would not thaw, and he could see nothing of the stove, which he pictured to himself as if it had been a lovely human being. The snow crackled, and the wind whistled around him. It was just the kind of frosty weather a snowman might thoroughly enjoy. But he did not enjoy it. How, indeed? Could he enjoy anything when he was stove-sick? "That is terrible disease for a snowman," said the yard dog. "I have suffered from it myself, but I got over it." "Away, away," he barked, and then he added, "The weather is going to change." And the weather did change. It began to thaw. As the warmth increased, the snowman decreased. He said nothing and made no complaint, which is a sure sign. One morning he broke and sunk down altogether, and, behold, where he had stood, something like a broomstick remained sticking up in the ground. It was the pole round which the boys had built him up. "Ah, now I understand why he had such a great longing for the stove," said the yard dog. "Why, there's the shovel that is used for cleaning out the stove, fastened to the pole. The snowman had a stove scraper in his body. That was what moved him so. But it's all over now. Away, away." And soon the winter passed. "Away, away," barked the horse yard dog. But the girls in the house sang, "Come from your fragrant home, green time, stretch your soft branches, willow tree. The months are bringing the sweet springtime, when the lark in the sky sings joyfully. Come, gentle sun, while the cuckoo sings, and I'll mock his note in my wanderings." And nobody thought any more of the snowman. Now. Queen First Story, which describes a looking-glass and the broken fragments. You must attend to the commencement of this story, for when we get to the end we shall know more than we do now about a very wicked hobgoblin. He was one of the very worst, for he was a real demon. One day, when he was in a merry mood, he made a looking-glass which had the power of making everything good or beautiful that was reflected in it almost shrink to nothing, while everything that was worthless and bad looked increased in size and worse than ever. The most lovely landscapes appeared like boiled spinach, and the people became hideous, and looked as if they stood on their heads and had no bodies. Their countenances were so distorted that no one could recognize them, and even one freckle on the face appeared to spread over the whole of the nose and mouth. The demon said this was very amusing. When a good or pious thought passed through the mind of anyone, it was misrepresented in the glass. And then how the demon laughed at his cunning invention. All who went to the demon's school, for he kept a school, talked everywhere of the wonders they had seen, and declared that people could now, for the first time, see what the world and mankind were really like. They carried the glass about everywhere, till at last there was not a land nor a people who had not been looked at through this distorted mirror. They wanted even to fly with it up to heaven to see the angels, but the higher they flew, the more slippery the glass became, and they could scarcely hold it, till at last it slipped from their hands, fell to the earth, and was broken into millions of pieces. But now the looking-glass caused more unhappiness than ever, for some of the fragments were not so large as a grain of sand, and they flew about the world into every country. When one of these tiny atoms flew into a person's eye, it stuck there unknown to him, and from that moment he saw everything through a distorted medium, or could see only the worst side of what he looked at, for even the smallest fragment retained the same power which had belonged to the whole mirror. Some few persons even got a fragment of the looking-glass in their hearts, and this was very terrible, for their hearts became cold like a lump of ice. A few of the pieces were so large that they could be used as window panes. It would have been a sad thing to look at our friends through them. Other pieces were made into spectacles. This was dreadful for those who wore them, for they could see nothing either rightly or justly. At all this the wicked demon laughed till his sides shook. It tickled him so to see the mischief he had done. There were still a number of these little fragments of glass floating about in the air, and now you shall hear what happened with one of them. Second story. A little boy and a little girl. In a large town full of houses and people, there is not room for everybody to have even a little garden. Therefore, they are obliged to be satisfied with a few flowers in flower pots. In one of these large towns lived two poor children who had a garden, something larger and better than a few flower pots. They were not brother and sister, but they loved each other almost as much as if they had been. Their parents lived opposite to each other in two garrets, where the roofs of neighboring houses projected out towards each other, and the water pipe ran between them. In each house was a little window, so that anyone could step across the gutter from one window to the other. The parents of these children had each a large wooden box in which they cultivated kitchen herbs for their own use, and a little rose bush in each box, which grew splendidly. Now, after a while, the parents decided to place these two boxes across the water pipe, so that they reached from one window to the other and looked like two banks of flowers. Sweet peas drooped over the boxes, and the rose bushes shot forth long branches, which were trained round the windows and clustered together almost like a triumphal arch of leaves and flowers. The boxes were very high, and the children knew they must not climb upon them without permission. But they were often, however, allowed to step out together and sit upon their little stools under the rose bushes, or play quietly. In winter all this pleasure came to an end, for the windows were sometimes quite frozen over. But then they would warm copper pennies on the stove and hold the warm pennies against the frozen pane. There would be very soon a little round hole through which they could peep, and the soft bright eyes of the little boy and girl would beam through the hole at each window as they looked at each other. Their names were Kay and Gerda. In summer, they could be together with one jump from the window, but in winter they had to go up and down the long staircase and out through the snow before they could meet. "See, there are the white bees swarming," said Kay's old grandmother one day when it was snowing. "Have they a queen bee?" asked the little boy, for he knew that the real bees had a queen. "To be sure they have," said the grandmother. "She is flying there where the swarm is thickest. She is the largest of them all, and never remains on the earth, but flies up to the dark clouds. Often at midnight she flies through the streets of the town and looks in at the windows. Then the ice freezes on the panes into wonderful shapes that look like flowers and castles." "Yes, I have seen them," said both the children, and they knew it must be true. "Can the Snow Queen come in here?" asked the little girl. "Only let her come," said the boy. "I'll set her on the stove, and then she'll melt." Then the grandmother smoothed his hair and told him some more tales. One evening, when little Kay was at home, half undressed, he climbed on a chair by the window and peeped out through the little hole. A few flakes of snow were falling, and one of them, rather larger than the rest, alighted on the edge of one of the flower boxes. This snowflake grew larger and larger, till at last it became the figure of a woman, dressed in garments of white gauze, which looked like millions of starry snowflakes linked together. She was fair and beautiful, but made of ice, shining and glittering ice. Still, she was alive, and her eyes sparkled like bright stars, but there was neither peace nor rest in their glance. She nodded towards the window and waved her hand. The little boy was frightened and sprang from the chair. At the same moment, it seemed as if a large bird flew by the window. On the following day, there was a clear frost, and very soon came the spring. The sun shone, the young green leaves burst forth. The swallows built their nests, windows were opened, and the children sat once more in the garden on the roof, high above all the other rooms. How beautiful the roses blossomed this summer! The little girl had learnt a hymn in which roses were spoken of, and then she thought of their own roses, and she sang the hymn to the little boy, and he sang too. "Roses bloom and cease to be, but we shall the Christ child see." Then the little ones held each other by the hand and kissed the roses and looked at the bright sunshine and spoke to it as if the Christ child were there. Those were splendid summer days. How beautiful and fresh it was out among the rose bushes, which seemed as if they would never leave off blooming. One day Kay and Gerda sat looking at a book full of pictures of animals and birds, and then, just as the clock in the church tower struck 12, Kay said, "Oh, something has struck my heart." And soon after, "There is something in my eye." The little girl put her arm round his neck and looked into his eye, but she could see nothing. "I think it is gone," he said. But it was not gone. It was one of those bits of the looking-glass, that magic mirror of which we have spoken. The ugly glass which made everything great and good appear small and ugly, while all that was wicked and bad became more visible, and every little fault could be plainly seen. Poor little Kay had also received a small grain in his heart, which very quickly turned to a lump of ice. He felt no more pain, but the glass was there still. "Why do you cry?" said he at last. "It makes you look ugly." "There is nothing the matter with me now." "Oh, see," he cried suddenly, "that rose is worm-eaten, and this one is quite crooked. After all, they are ugly roses, just like the box in which they stand." And then he kicked the boxes with his foot and pulled off the 2 roses. "Kay!" "What are you doing?" cried the little girl. And then, when he saw how frightened she was, he tore off another rose and jumped through his own window away from little Gerda. When she afterwards brought out the picture book, he said it was only fit for babies in long clothes, and when grandmother told any stories, he would interrupt her with, "But," or, when he could manage it, he would get behind her chair, put on a pair of spectacles, and imitate her very cleverly to make people laugh. By and by he began to mimic the speech and gait of persons in the street. All that was peculiar or disagreeable in a person he would imitate directly, and people said, "That boy will be very clever. He has a remarkable genius." But it was the piece of glass in his eye and the coldness in his heart that made him act like this. He would even tease little Gerda, who loved him with all her heart. His games, too, were quite different. They were not so childish. One winter's day, when it snowed, he brought out a burning glass. Then he held out the tail of his blue coat and let the snowflakes fall upon it. "Look in this glass, Gerda," said he, and she saw how every flake of snow was magnified and looked like a beautiful flower or a glittering star. "Is it not clever?" said Kay, "and much more interesting than looking at real flowers. There is not a single fault in it, and the snowflakes are quite perfect till they begin to melt." Soon after, Kay made his appearance in large, thick gloves and with his sledge at his back. He called upstairs to Gerda, "I've got to leave to go into the great square, where the other boys play and ride." And away he went. In the great square, the boldest among the boys would often tie their sledges to the country people's carts and go with them a good way. This was capital. But while they were all amusing themselves, and Kay with them, a great sledge came by. It was painted white, and in it sat someone wrapped in a rough white fur and wearing a white cap. The sledge drove twice round the square, and Kay fastened his own little sledge to it, so that when it went away he followed with it. It went faster and faster, right through the next street, and then the person who drove turned round and nodded pleasantly to Kay, just as if they were acquainted with each other. But whenever Kay wished to loosen his little sledge, the driver nodded again. So Kay sat still, and they drove out through the town gate. Then the snow began to fall so heavily that the little boy could not see a hand's breadth before him. But still they drove on. Then he suddenly loosened the cord, so that the large sled might go on without him. But it was of no use. His little carriage held fast, and away they went like the wind. Then he called out loudly, but nobody heard him, while the snow beat upon him, and the sledge flew onwards. Every now and then it gave a jump, as if it were going over hedges and ditches. The boy was frightened and tried to say a prayer, but he could remember nothing but the multiplication table. The snowflakes became larger and larger, till they appeared like great white chickens. All at once they sprang on one side. The great sledge stopped, and the person who had driven it rose up. The fur and the cap, which were made entirely of snow, fell off, and he saw a lady, tall and white. It was the Snow Queen. "We have driven well," said she, "but why do you tremble? Here, creep into my warm fur." Then she seated him beside her in the sledge, and as she wrapped the fur round him, he felt as if he was sinking into a snowdrift. "Are you still cold?" she asked, as she kissed him on the forehead. The kiss was colder than ice. It went quite through to his heart, which was already almost a lump of ice. He felt as if he were going to die, but only for a moment. He soon seemed quite well again, and did not notice the cold around him. "My sledge! Don't forget my sledge," was his first thought, and then he looked and saw that it was bound fast to one of the white chickens, which flew behind him with the sledge at its back. The Snow Queen kissed little Kay again, and by this time he had forgotten little Gerda, his grandmother, and all at home. "Now you must have no more kisses," she said, "or I should kiss you to death." Kay looked at her and saw that she was so beautiful. He could not imagine a more lovely and intelligent face. She did not now seem to be made of ice, as when he had seen her through his window, and she had nodded to him. In his eyes she was perfect, and she did not feel at all afraid. He told her he could do mental arithmetic as far as fractions, and that he knew the number of square miles and the number of inhabitants in the country. And she always smiled, so that he thought he did not know enough yet. And she looked round the vast expanse as she flew higher and higher with him upon a black cloud, while the storm blew and howled as if it were singing old songs. They flew over woods and lakes, over sea and land. Below them roared the wild wind. The wolves howled and the snow crackled. Over them flew the black screaming crows. And above all shone the moon, clear and bright. And so Kay passed through the long winter's night, and by day he slept at the feet of the Snow Queen. Third story. The flower garden of the woman who could conjure. But how fared little Gerda during Kay's absence? What had become of him no one knew, nor could anyone give the slightest information, excepting the boys, who said that he had tied his sledge to another very large one, which had driven through the street and out at the town gate. Nobody knew where it went. Many tears were shed for him, and little Gerda wept bitterly for a long time. She said she knew he must be dead, that he was drowned in the river which flowed close by the school. Oh, indeed, those long winter days were very dreary. But at last spring came with warm sunshine. "Kay is dead and gone," said little Gerda. "I don't believe it," said the sunshine. "He is dead and gone," she said to the sparrows. "We don't believe it," they replied, and at last little Gerda began to doubt it herself. "I will put on my new red shoes," she said one morning, "those that Kay has never seen, and then I will go down to the river and ask for him." It was quite early when she kissed her old grandmother, who was still asleep. Then she put on her red shoes and went quite alone out of the town gates toward the river. "Is it true that you have taken my little playmate away from me?" said she to the river. "I will give you my red shoes if you will give him back to me." And it seemed as if the waves nodded to her in a strange manner. Then she took off her red shoes, which she liked better than anything else, and threw them both into the river, but they fell near the bank, and the little waves carried them back to the land, just as if the river would not take from her what she loved best, because they could not give her back little Kay. But she thought the shoes had not been thrown out far enough. Then she crept into a boat that lay among the reeds, and threw the shoes again from the farther end of the boat into the water. But it was not fastened, and her movement sent it gliding away from the land. When she saw this, she hastened to reach the end of the boat, but before she could, so it was more than a yard from the bank, and drifting away faster than ever. Then little Gerda was very much frightened and began to cry, but no one heard her except the sparrows, and they could not carry her to land, but they flew along by the shore and sang as if to comfort her, "Here we are, here we are." The boat floated with the stream. Little Gerda sat quite still with only her stockings on her feet. The red shoes floated after her, but she could not reach them because the boat kept so much in advance. The banks on each side of the river were very pretty. There were beautiful flowers, old trees, sloping fields in which cows and sheep were grazing, but not a man to be seen. "Perhaps the river will carry me to little Kay," thought Gerda, and then she became more cheerful, and raised her head and looked at the beautiful green banks, and so the boat sailed on for hours. At length she came to a large cherry orchard, in which stood a small red house with strange red and blue windows. It had also a thatched roof, and outside were two wooden soldiers that presented arms to her as she sailed past. Gerda called out to them, for she thought they were alive, but of course they did not answer. And as the boat drifted nearer to the shore, she saw what they really were. Then Gerda called still louder, and there came a very old woman out of the house, leaning on a crutch. She wore a large hat to shade her from the sun, and on it were painted all sorts of pretty flowers. "You poor little child," said the old woman, "how did you manage to come all this distance into the wide world on such a rapid rolling stream?" And then the old woman walked in the water, seized the boat with her crutch, drew it to land, and lifted Gerda out. And Gerda was glad to feel herself on dry ground, although she was rather afraid of the strange old woman. "Come and tell me who you are," said she, "and how came you here?" Then Gerda told her everything, while the old woman shook her head and said, "Hem, hem." And when she had finished, Gerda asked if she had not seen little Kay, and the old woman told her he had not passed by that way, but he very likely would come. So she told Gerda not to be sorrowful, but to taste the cherries and look at the flowers. They were better than any picture book, for each of them could tell a story. Then she took Gerda by the hand and led her into the little house, and the old woman closed the door. The windows were very high, and as the panes were red, blue, and yellow, the daylight shone through them in all sorts of singular colours. On the table stood beautiful cherries, and Gerda had permission to eat as many as she would. While she was eating them, the old woman combed out her long flaxen ringlets with a golden comb, and the glossy curls hung down on each side of the little round pleasant face, which looked fresh and blooming as a rose. "I have long been wishing for a dear little maiden like you," said the old woman, "and now you must stay with me and see how happily we shall live together." And while she went on combing little Gerda's hair, she thought less and less about her adopted brother Kay, for the old woman could conjure, although she was not a wicked witch. She conjured only a little for her own amusement, and now because she wanted to keep Gerda. Therefore she went into the garden and stretched out her crutch towards all the rose trees, beautiful though they were, and they immediately sunk into the dark earth, so that no one could tell where they had once stood. The old woman was afraid that if little Gerda saw roses, she would think of those at home, and then remember little Kay, and run away. Then she took Gerda into the flower garden. How fragrant and beautiful it was! Every flower that could be thought of for every season of the year was here in full bloom. No picture book could have more beautiful colours. Gerda jumped for joy, and played till the sun went down behind the tall cherry trees. Then she slept in an elegant bed with red silk pillows, embroidered with coloured violets, and then she dreamed as pleasantly as a queen on her wedding day. The next day, and for many days after, Gerda played with the flowers in the warm sunshine. She knew every flower, and yet, although there were so many of them, it seemed as if one were missing. But which it was, she could not tell. One day, however, as she sat looking at the old woman's hat with the painted flowers on it, she saw that the prettiest of them all was a rose. The old woman had forgotten to take it from her hat when she made all the roses sink into the earth. But it is difficult to keep the thoughts together in everything. One little mistake upsets all our arrangements. "What, are there no roses here?" cried Gerda, and she ran out into the garden and examined all the beds and searched and searched. There was not one to be found. Then she sat down and wept, and her tears fell just on the place where one of the rose trees had sunk down. The warm tears moistened the earth, and the rose tree sprouted up at once, as blooming as when it had sunk. And Gerda embraced it and kissed the roses, and thought of the beautiful roses at home, and with them of little Kay. "Oh, how I have been detained," said the little maiden. "I wanted to seek for little Kay. Do you know where he is?" she asked the roses. "Do you think he is dead?" And the roses answered, "No, he is not dead. We have been in the ground where all the dead lie, but Kay is not there." "Thank you," said little Gerda, and then she went to the other flowers and looked into their little cups and asked, "Do you know where little Kay is?" But each flower, as it stood in the sunshine, dreamed only of its own little fairy tale of history. Not one knew anything of Kay. Gerda heard many stories from the flowers as she asked them one after another about him. "And what?" said the tiger lily. "Hark! Do you hear the drum? Turn, turn. There are only two notes always. Turn, turn. Listen to the women's song of mourning. Hear the cry of the priest. In her long red robe stands the Hindu widow by the funeral pile. The flames rise around her as she places herself on the dead body of her husband. But the Hindu woman is thinking of the living one in that circle, of him, her son, who lighted those flames. Those shining eyes trouble her heart more painfully than the flames which will soon consume her body to ashes. Can the fire of the heart be extinguished in the flames of the funeral pile?" "I don't understand that at all," said little Gerda. "That is my story," said the tiger lily. "What?" says the convolvulus. "Near yonder narrow road stands an old knight's castle. Thick ivy creeps over the old ruined walls, leaf over leaf, even to the balcony, in which stands a beautiful maiden. She bends over the balustrades and looks up the road. No rose on its stem is fresher than she. No apple blossom, wafted by the wind, floats more lightly than she moves. Her rich silk rustles as she bends over and exclaims, 'Will he not come?'" "Is it Kay you mean?" asked Gerda. "I am only speaking of a story of my dream," replied the flower. "What?" said the little snowdrop. "Between two trees a rope is hanging. There is a piece of board upon it. It is a swing. Two pretty little girls, in dresses white as snow, and with long green ribbons fluttering from their hats, are sitting upon it swinging. Their brother, who is taller than they are, stands in the swing. He has one arm round the rope to steady himself. In one hand he holds a little bowl, and in the other a clay pipe. He is blowing bubbles. As the swing goes on, the bubbles fly upward, reflecting the most beautiful varying colors. The last still hangs from the bowl of the pipe and sways in the wind. On goes the swing, and then a little black dog comes running up. He is almost as light as the bubble, and he raises himself on his hind legs and wants to be taken into the swing, but it does not stop, and the dog falls. Then he barks and gets angry. The children stoop towards him, and the bubble bursts. A swinging plank, a light, sparkling foam picture, that is my story." "It may be all very pretty what you are telling me," said little Gerda, "but you speak so mournfully, and you do not mention little Kay at all. What do the hyacinths say?" "There were 3 beautiful sisters, fair and delicate. The dress of one was red, of the second blue, and of the third pure white. Hand in hand they danced in the bright moonlight by the calm lake, but they were human beings, not fairy elves. The sweet fragrance attracted them, and they disappeared in the wood. Here the fragrance became stronger. 3 coffins, in which lay the 3 beautiful maidens, glided from the thickest part of the forest across the lake. The fireflies flew lightly over them like little floating torches." "Do the dancing maidens sleep, or are they dead?" "The scent of the flower says that they are corpses. The evening bell tolls their knell." "You make me quite sorrowful," said little Gerda. "Your perfume is so strong, you make me think of the dead maidens." "Ah, is little Kay really dead then? The roses have been in the earth, and they say no." "Cling, clang," tolled the hyacinth bells. "We are not tolling for little Kay. We do not know him. We sing our song, the only one we know." Then Gerda went to the buttercups that were glittering amongst the bright green leaves. "You are little bright suns," said Gerda. "Tell me if you know where I can find my playfellow." And the buttercup sparkled gaily and looked again at Gerda. What song could the buttercups sing? It was not about Kay. The bright warm sun shone on a little court on the first warm day of spring. His bright beams rested on the white walls of the neighbouring house, and close by bloomed the first yellow flower of the season, glittering like gold in the sun's warm ray. An old woman sat in her armchair at the house door, and her granddaughter, a poor and pretty servant maid, came to see her for a short visit. When she kissed her grandmother, there was gold everywhere, the gold of the heart in that holy kiss. It was a golden morning. There was gold in the beaming sunlight, gold in the leaves of the lowly flower, and on the lips of the maiden. "There, that is my story," said the buttercup. "My poor old grandmother," sighed Gerda. "She is longing to see me, and grieving for me as she did for little Kay. But I shall soon go home now, and take little Kay with me. It is no use asking the flowers. They know only their own songs, and can give me no information." And then she tucked up her little dress, that she might run faster. But the narcissus caught her by the leg as she was jumping over it. So she stopped and looked at the tall yellow flower and said, "Perhaps you may know something." Then she stooped down quite close to the flower and listened. "And what did he say?" "I can see myself, I can see myself," said the narcissus. "Oh, how sweet is my perfume." Up in a little room with a bow window stands a little dancing girl, half undressed. She stands sometimes on one leg and sometimes on both, and looks as if she would tread the whole world under her feet. She is nothing but a delusion. She is pouring water out of a teapot on a piece of stuff which she holds in her hand. It is her bodice. "Cleanliness is a good thing," she says. Her white dress hangs on a peg. It has also been washed in the teapot and dried on the roof. She puts it on and ties a saffron-coloured handkerchief round her neck, which makes the dress look whiter. See how she stretches out her legs as if she were showing off on a stem. I can see myself. I can see myself. "What do I care for all that?" said Gerda. "You need not tell me such stuff." And then she ran to the other end of the garden. The door was fastened, but she pressed against the rusty latch and it gave way. The door sprang open and little Gerda ran out with bare feet into the wide world. She looked back 3 times, but no one seemed to be following her. At last she could run no longer. So she sat down to rest on a great stone, and when she looked round she saw that the summer was over, and autumn very far advanced. She had known nothing of this in the beautiful garden, where the sun shone and the flowers grew all the year round. "Oh, how I have wasted my time," said little Gerda. "It is autumn. I must not rest any longer." And she rose up to go on. But her little feet were wounded and sore, and everything around her looked so cold and bleak. The long willow leaves were quite yellow. The dewdrops fell like water. Leaf after leaf dropped from the trees. The sloe-thorn alone still bore fruit, but the sloes were sour and set the teeth on edge. Oh, how dark and weary the whole world appeared. 4th story. The Prince and Princess. Gerda was obliged to rest again, and just opposite the place where she sat, she saw a great crow come hopping across the snow toward her. He stood looking at her for some time, and then he wagged his head and said, "Caw, caw, good day, good day." He pronounced the words as plainly as he could, because he meant to be kind to the little girl. And then he asked her where she was going, all alone in the wide world. The word alone Gerda understood very well and knew how much it expressed. So then she told the crow the whole story of her life and adventures, and asked him if he had seen little Kay. The crow nodded his head very gravely and said, "Perhaps I have. It may be." "No, do you think you have?" cried little Gerda, and she kissed the crow and hugged him almost to death with joy. "Gently, gently," said the crow. "I believe I know. I think it may be little Kay, but he has certainly forgotten you by this time for the princess." "Does he live with a princess?" asked Gerda. "Yes." "Listen," replied the crow, "but it is so difficult to speak your language. If you understand the crow's language, then I can explain it better." "Do you?" "No. I have never learnt it," said Gerda, "but my grandmother understands it and used to speak it to me. I wish I had learnt it." "It does not matter," answered the crow. "I will explain as well as I can, although it will be very badly done." And he told her what he had heard. "In this kingdom where we now are," said he, "there lives a princess who is so wonderfully clever that she has read all the newspapers in the world and forgotten them too, although she is so clever. A short time ago, as she was sitting on her throne, which people say is not such an agreeable seat as is often supposed, she began to sing a song which commences in these words: 'Why should I not be married?' 'Why not indeed?' said she. And so she determined to marry if she could find a husband who knew what to say when he was spoken to, and not one who could only look grand, for that was so tiresome. Then she assembled all her court ladies together at the beat of the drum, and when they heard of her intentions, they were very much pleased. 'We are so glad to hear it,' said they. 'We were talking about it ourselves the other day.' 'You may believe that every word I tell you is true,' said the crow, 'for I have a tame sweetheart who goes freely about the palace, and she told me all this.' Of course his sweetheart was a crow, for birds of a feather flock together, and one crow always chooses another crow. Newspapers were published immediately, with a border of hearts, and the initials of the princess among them. They gave notice that every young man who was handsome was free to visit the castle and speak with the princess, and those who could reply loud enough to be heard when spoken to were to make themselves quite at home at the palace. But the one who spoke best would be chosen as a husband for the princess. "Yes, yes, you may believe me, it is all as true as I sit here," said the crow. The people came in crowds. There was a great deal of crushing and running about, but no one succeeded either on the first or second day. They could all speak very well while they were outside in the streets, but when they entered the palace gates and saw the guards in silver uniforms, and the footmen in their golden livery on the staircase, and the great halls lighted up, they became quite confused. And when they stood before the throne on which the princess sat, they could do nothing but repeat the last words she had said, and she had no particular wish to hear her own words over again. It was just as if they had all taken something to make them sleepy while they were in the palace, for they did not recover themselves nor speak till they got back again into the street. There was quite a long line of them reaching from the town gate to the palace. "I went myself to see them," said the crow. They were hungry and thirsty, for at the palace they did not get even a glass of water. Some of the wisest had taken a few slices of bread and butter with them, but they did not share it with their neighbors. They thought if they went into the princess looking hungry, there would be a better chance for themselves. "But Kay, tell me about little Kay," said Gerda. "Was he amongst the crowd?" "Stop a bit, we are just coming to him." It was on the third day. There came marching cheerfully along to the palace a little personage, without horses or carriage, his eyes sparkling like yours. He had beautiful long hair, but his clothes were very poor. "That was Kay," said Gerda joyfully. "Oh, then I have found him." And she clapped her hands. "He had a little knapsack on his back," added the crow. "No, it must have been his sledge," said Gerda, "for he went away with it." "It may have been so," said the crow. "I did not look at it very closely, but I know from my tame sweetheart that he passed through the palace gates, saw the guards in their silver uniform, and the servants in their liveries of gold on the stairs, but he was not in the least embarrassed. "It must be very tiresome to stand on the stairs," he said. "I prefer to go in." The rooms were blazing with light. Councillors and ambassadors walked about with bare feet, carrying golden vessels. It was enough to make anyone feel serious. His boots creaked loudly as he walked, and yet he was not at all uneasy. "It must be Kay," said Gerda. "I know he had new boots on. I have heard them creak in grandmother's room." "They really did creak," said the crow. Yet he went boldly up to the princess herself, who was sitting on a pearl as large as a spinning wheel, and all the ladies of the court were present with their maids, and all the cavaliers with their servants, and each of the maids had another maid to wait upon her, and the cavaliers' servants had their own servants, as well as a page each. They all stood in circles round the princess, and the nearer they stood to the door, the prouder they looked. The servants' pages, who always wore slippers, could hardly be looked at. They held themselves up so proudly by the door. "It must be quite awful," said little Gerda. "But did Kay win the princess?" "If I had not been a crow," said he, "I would have married her myself, although I am engaged. He spoke just as well as I do when I speak the crow's language, so I heard from my tame sweetheart. He was quite free and agreeable, and said he had not come to woo the princess, but to hear her wisdom, and he was as pleased with her as she was with him." "Oh, certainly that was Kay," said Gerda. "He was so clever, he could work mental arithmetic and fractions." "Oh, will you take me to the palace?" "It is very easy to ask that," replied the crow, "but how are we to manage it? However, I will speak about it to my tame sweetheart and ask her advice, for I must tell you it will be very difficult to gain permission for a little girl like you to enter the palace." "Oh, yes, but I shall gain permission easily," said Gerda, "for when Kay hears that I am here, he will come out and fetch me in immediately." "Wait for me here by the palings," said the crow, wagging his head as he flew away. It was late in the evening before the crow returned. "Caw, caw," he said, "she sends you greeting. And here is a little roll which she took from the kitchen for you. There is plenty of bread there, and she thinks you must be hungry. It is not possible for you to enter the palace by the front entrance. The guards in silver uniform and the servants in gold livery would not allow it. But do not cry, we will manage to get you in. My sweetheart knows a little back staircase that leads to the sleeping apartments, and she knows where to find the key." Then they went into the garden, through the great avenue, where the leaves were falling one after another, and they could see the light in the palace being put out in the same manner. And the crow led little Gerda to the back door, which stood ajar. Oh, how little Gerda's heart beat with anxiety and longing! It was just as if she were going to do something wrong, and yet she only wanted to know where little Kay was. It must be he, she thought, with those clear eyes and that long hair. She could fancy she saw him smiling at her as he used to at home, when they sat among the roses. He would certainly be glad to see her, and to hear what a long distance she had come for his sake, and to know how sorry they had been at home because he did not come back. Oh, what joy and yet fear she felt! They were now on the stairs, and in a small closet at the top a lamp was burning. In the middle of the floor stood the tame crow, turning her head from side to side, and gazing at Gerda, who curtsied as her grandmother had taught her to do. "My betrothed has spoken so very highly of you, my little lady," said the tame crow. "Your life history, Vita, as it may be called, is very touching. If you will take the lamp, I will walk before you. We will go straight along this way. Then we shall meet no one." "It seems to me as if somebody were behind us," said Gerda, as something rushed by her like a shadow on the wall, and then horses with flying manes and thin legs, hunters, ladies and gentlemen on horseback, glided by her, like shadows on the wall. "They are only dreams," said the crow. "They are coming to fetch the thoughts of the great people out hunting. All the better, for we shall be able to look at them in their beds more safely. I hope that when you rise to honor and favor, you will show a grateful heart." "You may be quite sure of that," said the crow from the forest. They now came into the first hall, the walls of which were hung with rose-colored satin, embroidered with artificial flowers. Here the dreams again flitted by them, but so quickly that Gerda could not distinguish the royal persons. Each hall appeared more splendid than the last. It was in naught to bewilder anyone. At length they reached a bedroom. The ceiling was like a great palm tree, with glass leaves of the most costly crystal, and over the center of the floor 2 beds, each resembling a lily, hung from a stem of gold. One, in which the princess lay, was white, the other was red, and in this Gerda had to seek for little Kay. She pushed one of the red leaves aside and saw a little brown neck. "Oh, that must be Kay." She called his name out quite loud and held the lamp over him. The dreams rushed back into the room on horseback. He woke and turned his head round. It was not little Kay. The prince was only like him in the neck, still he was young and pretty. Then the princess peeped out of her white lily bed and asked what was the matter. Then little Gerda wept and told her story and all that the crows had done to help her. "You poor child," said the prince and princess. Then they praised the crows and said they were not angry for what they had done, but that it must not happen again, and this time they should be rewarded. "Would you like to have your freedom?" asked the princess, "or would you prefer to be raised to the position of court crows, with all that is left in the kitchen for yourselves?" Then both the crows bowed and begged to have a fixed appointment, for they thought of their old age, and said it would be so comfortable to feel that they had provision for their old days, as they called it. And then the prince got out of his bed and gave it up to Gerda. He could do no more, and she lay down. She folded her little hands and thought, "How good everyone is to me, men and animals too." Then she closed her eyes and fell into a sweet sleep. All the dreams came flying back again to her, and they looked like angels, and one of them drew a little sledge on which sat Kay and nodded to her. But all this was only a dream and vanished as soon as she awoke. The following day she was dressed from head to foot in silk and velvet, and they invited her to stay at the palace for a few days and enjoy herself. But she only begged for a pair of boots and a little carriage and a horse to draw it, so that she might go into the wide world to seek for Kay. And she obtained not only boots, but also a muff, and she was neatly dressed. And when she was ready to go, there, at the door, she found a coach made of pure gold, with the coat of arms of the prince and princess shining upon it like a star, and the coachman, footman, and outriders, all wearing golden crowns on their heads. The prince and princess themselves helped her into the coach and wished her success. The forest crow, who was now married, accompanied her for the first 3 miles. He sat by Gerda's side, as he could not bear riding backwards. The tame crow stood in the doorway, flapping her wings. She could not go with them, because she had been suffering from headache ever since the new appointment, no doubt from eating too much. The coach was well stored with sweet cakes, and under the seat were fruit and gingerbread nuts. "Farewell, farewell," cried the prince and princess, and little Gerda wept, and the crow wept. And then, after a few miles, the crow also said farewell, and this was the saddest parting. However, he flew to a tree and stood flapping his black wings as long as he could see the coach, which glittered in the bright sunshine. 5th Story, Little Robber. Girl, the coach drove on through a thick forest, where it lighted up the way like a torch, and dazzled the eyes of some robbers who could not bear to let it pass them unmolested. "It is gold! It is gold!" cried they, rushing forward and seizing the horses. Then they struck the little jockeys, the coachman, and the footman dead, and pulled little Gerda out of the carriage. "She is fat and pretty, and she has been fed with the kernels of nuts," said the old robber woman, who had a long beard and eyebrows that hung over her eyes. "She is as good as a little lamb. How nice she will taste." And as she said this, she drew forth a shining knife that glittered horribly. "Oh!" screamed the old woman the same moment, for her own daughter, who held her back, had bitten her in the ear. She was a wild and naughty girl, and the mother called her an ugly thing, and had not time to kill Gerda. "She shall play with me," said the little robber girl. "She shall give me her muff and her pretty dress, and sleep with me in my bed." And then she bit her mother again, and made her spring in the air and jump about, and all the robbers laughed and said, "See how she is dancing with her young cub." "I will have a ride in the coach," said the little robber girl, and she would have her own way, for she was so self-willed and obstinate. She and Gerda seated themselves in the coach and drove away over stumps and stones into the depths of the forest. The little robber girl was about the same size as Gerda, but stronger. She had broader shoulders and a darker skin. Her eyes were quite black, and she had a mournful look. She clasped little Gerda round the waist and said, "They shall not kill you as long as you don't make us vexed with you. I suppose you are a princess." "No," said Gerda, and then she told her all her history and how fond she was of little Kay. The robber girl looked earnestly at her, nodded her head slightly, and said, "They shan't kill you, even if I do get angry with you, for I will do it myself." And then she wiped Gerda's eyes, and stuck her own hands in the beautiful muff, which was so soft and warm. The coach stopped in the courtyard of a robber's castle, the walls of which were cracked from top to bottom. Ravens and crows flew in and out of the holes and crevices, while great bulldogs, either of which looked as if it could swallow a man, were jumping about, but they were not allowed to bark. In the large and smoky hall, a bright fire was burning on the stone floor. There was no chimney, so the smoke went up to the ceiling and found a way out for itself. Soup was boiling in a large cauldron, and hares and rabbits were roasting on the spit. "You shall sleep with me and all my little animals tonight," said the robber girl, after they had had something to eat and drink. So she took Gerda to a corner of the hall, where some straw and carpets were laid down. Above them, on laths and perches, were more than 100 pigeons, who all seemed to be asleep, although they moved slightly when the two little girls came near them. "These all belong to me," said the robber girl, and she seized the nearest to her, held it by the feet, and shook it till it flapped its wings. "Kiss it," cried she, flapping it in Gerda's face. "There sit the wood-pigeons," continued she, pointing to a number of laths and a cage which had been fixed into the walls near one of the openings. Both rascals would fly away directly if they were not closely locked up. And here is my old sweetheart. Bah!" And she dragged out a reindeer by the horn. He wore a bright copper ring round his neck and was tied up. We are obliged to hold him tight too, or else he would run away from us also. I tickle his neck every evening with my sharp knife, which frightens him very much." And then the robber girl drew a long knife from a chink in the wall and let it slide gently over the reindeer's neck. The poor animal began to kick, and the little robber girl laughed and pulled down Gerda into bed with her. "Will you have that knife with you while you are asleep?" asked Gerda, looking at it in great fright. "I always sleep with the knife by me," said the robber girl. "No one knows what may happen. But now tell me again all about little Kay and why you went out into the world." Then Gerda repeated her story over again, while the wood pigeons in the cage over her cooed and the other pigeons slept. The little robber girl put one arm across Gerda's neck and held the knife in the other, and was soon fast asleep and snoring. But Gerda could not close her eyes at all. She knew not whether she was to live or die. The robbers sat round the fire, singing and drinking, and the old woman stumbled about. It was a terrible sight for a little girl to witness. Then the wood pigeon said, "Coo, coo, we have seen little Kay." A white fowl carried his sledge, and he sat in the carriage of the Snow Queen, which drove through the wood while we were lying in our nest. She blew upon us, and all the young ones died excepting us too. Coo, coo. "What are you saying up there?" cried Gerda. "Where was the Snow Queen going? Do you know anything about it?" "She was most likely travelling to Lapland, where there is always snow and ice. Ask the reindeer that is fastened up there with a rope." "Yes, there is always snow and ice," said the reindeer. "And it is a glorious place. You can leap and run about freely on the sparkling ice plains. The Snow Queen has her summer tent there, but her strong castle is at the North Pole, on an island called Spitzbergen." "Oh, Kay, little Kay," sighed Gerda. "Lie still," said the robber girl, "or I shall run my knife into your body." In the morning Gerda told her all that the wood pigeons had said, and the little robber girl looked quite serious and nodded her head, and said, "That is all talk, that is all talk. Do you know where Lapland is?" she asked the reindeer. "You should know better than I do," said the animal, while his eyes sparkled. "I was born and brought up there, and used to run about the snow-covered plains." "Now listen," said the robber girl. "All our men are gone away. Only Mother is here, and here she will stay, but at noon she always drinks out of a great bottle and afterwards sleeps for a little while. And then I'll do something for you." Then she jumped out of bed, clasped her mother round the neck, and pulled her by the beard, crying, "My own little nanny goat, good morning." Then her mother filliped her nose till it was quite red, yet she did it all for love. When the mother had drunk out of the bottle, and was gone to sleep, the little robber maiden went to the reindeer and said, "I should like very much to tickle your neck a few times more with my knife, for it makes you look so funny. But never mind, I will untie your cord and set you free, so that you may run away to Lapland. But you must make good use of your legs, and carry this little maiden to the castle of the Snow Queen, where her playfellow is. You have heard what she told me, for she spoke loud enough, and you were listening." Then the reindeer jumped for joy, and the little robber girl lifted Gerda on his back, and had the forethought to tie her on, and even to give her her own little cushion to sit on. "Here are your fur boots for you," said she, "for it will be very cold, but I must keep the muff, it is so pretty. However, you shall not be frozen for the want of it. Here are my mother's large warm mittens. They will reach up to your elbows. Let me put them on. There, now your hands look just like my mother's." But Gerda wept for joy. "I don't like to see you fret," said the little robber girl. "You ought to look quite happy now, and here are 2 loaves and a ham, so that you need not starve." These were fastened on the reindeer, and then the little robber maiden opened the door, coaxed in all the great dogs, and then cut the string with which the reindeer was fastened, with her sharp knife, and said, "Now run, but mind you take good care of the little girl." And then Gerda stretched out her hand, with the great mitten on it, towards the little robber girl, and said, "Farewell." And away flew the reindeer over stumps and stones, through the great forest, over marshes and plains, as quickly as he could. The wolves howled, and the raven screamed, while up in the sky quivered red lights like flames of fire. "There are my old northern lights," said the reindeer. "See how they flash." And he ran on day and night, still faster and faster. But the loaves and the ham were all eaten by the time they reached Lapland. 6th story. The Lapland Woman and the Finland Woman. They stopped at a little hut. It was very mean-looking. The roof sloped nearly down to the ground, and the door was so low that the family had to creep in on their hands and knees when they went in and out. There was no one at home but an old Lapland woman who was cooking fish by the light of a train oil lamp. The reindeer told her all about Gerda's story, after having first told his own, which seemed to him the most important. But Gerda was so pinched with the cold that she could not speak. "Oh, you poor things," said the Lapland woman. "You have a long way to go yet. You must travel more than 100 miles farther, to Finland. The Snow Queen lives there now, and she burns Bengal lights every evening. I will write a few words on a dried stockfish, for I have no paper, and you can take it from me to the Finland woman who lives there. She can give you better information than I can." So, when Gerda was warmed and had taken something to eat and drink, the woman wrote a few words on the dried fish and told Gerda to take great care of it. Then she tied her again on the reindeer, and he set off at full speed. Flash, flash, went the beautiful blue northern lights in the air the whole night long. And at length they reached Finland and knocked at the chimney of the Finland woman's hut, for it had no door above the ground. They crept in, but it was so terribly hot inside that woman wore scarcely any clothes. She was small and very dirty-looking. She loosened little Gerda's dress and took off the fur boots and the mittens, or Gerda would have been unable to bear the heat, and then she placed a piece of ice on the reindeer's head and read what was written on the dried fish. After she had read it 3 times, she knew it by heart. So she popped the fish into the soup saucepan, as she knew it was good to eat, and she never wasted anything. The reindeer told his own story first, and then little Gerda's, and the Finlander twinkled with her clever eyes, but she said nothing. "You are so clever," said the reindeer. "I know you can tie all the winds of the world with a piece of twine. If a sailor unties one knot, he has a fair wind. When he unties the second, it blows hard. But if the third and fourth are loosened, then comes a storm, which will root up whole forests. Cannot you give this little maiden something which will make her as strong as 12 men to overcome the Snow Queen?" "The power of 12 men," said the Finland woman. "That would be of very little use." But she went to a shelf and took down and unrolled a large skin, on which were inscribed wonderful characters, and she read till the perspiration ran down from her forehead. But the reindeer begged so hard for little Gerda, and Gerda looked at the Finland woman with such beseeching, tearful eyes, that her own eyes began to twinkle again. So she drew the reindeer into a corner and whispered to him while she laid a fresh piece of ice on his head. "Little Kay is really with the Snow Queen, but he finds everything there so much to his taste and his liking that he believes it is the finest place in the world. But this is because he has a piece of broken glass in his heart and a little piece of glass in his eye. These must be taken out, or he will never be a human being again, and the Snow Queen will retain her power over him. But can you not give little Gerda something to help her to conquer this power?" "I can give her no greater power than she has already," said the woman. "Don't you see how strong that is? How men and animals are obliged to serve her, and how well she has got through the world, barefooted as she is. She cannot receive any power from me greater than she now has, which consists in her own purity and innocence of heart. If she cannot herself obtain access to the Snow Queen and remove the glass fragments from little Kay, we can do nothing to help her. 2 miles from here, the Snow Queen's garden begins. You can carry the little girl so far and set her down by the large bush which stands in the snow, covered with red berries. Do not stay gossiping, but come back here as quickly as you can." Then the Finland woman lifted little Gerda upon the reindeer, and he ran away with her as quickly as he could. "Oh, I have forgotten my boots and my mittens," cried little Gerda as soon as she felt the cutting cold. But the reindeer dared not stop, so he ran on till he reached the bush with the red berries. Here he set Gerda down, and he kissed her, and the great bright tears trickled over the animal's cheeks. Then he left her and ran back as fast as he could. There stood poor Gerda, without shoes, without gloves, in the midst of cold, dreary, ice-bound Finland. She ran forwards as quickly as she could. When a whole regiment of snowflakes came round her, they did not, however, fall from the sky, which was quite clear and glittering with the northern lights. The snowflakes ran along the ground, and the nearer they came to her, the larger they appeared. Gerda remembered how large and beautiful they looked through the burning glass. But these were really larger and much more terrible, for they were alive and were the guards of the Snow Queen, and had the strangest shapes. Some were like great porcupines, others like twisted serpents with their heads stretching out, and some few were like little fat bears with their hair bristled, but all were dazzlingly white, and all were living snowflakes. Then little Gerda repeated the Lord's Prayer, and the cold was so great that she could see her own breath come out of her mouth like steam as she uttered the words. The steam appeared to increase as she continued her prayer, till it took the shape of little angels who grew larger the moment they touched the earth. They all wore helmets on their heads and carried spears and shields. Their number continued to increase more and more, and by the time Gerda had finished her prayers, a whole legion stood round her. They thrust their spears into the terrible snowflakes, so that they shivered into 100 pieces, and little Gerda could go forward with courage and safety. The angels stroked her hands and feet so that she felt the cold less, and she hastened on to the Snow Queen's castle. But now we must see what Kay is doing. In truth, he thought not of little Gerda, and never supposed she could be standing in the front of the palace. 7th. Story of the Palace of the Snow, Queen and What Happened. There at last the walls of the palace were formed of drifted snow, and the windows and doors of the cutting winds. There were more than 100 rooms in it, all as if they had been formed with snow blown together. The largest of them extended for several miles. They were all lighted up by the vivid light of the aurora, and they were so large and empty, so icy cold and glittering. There were no amusements here, not even a little bear's ball, when the storm might have been the music, and the bears could have danced on their hind legs and shown their good manners. There were no pleasant games of snapdragon or touch, or even a gossip over the tea-table for the young lady foxes. Empty, vast, and cold were the halls of the Snow Queen. The flickering flame of the northern lights could be plainly seen, whether they rose high or low in the heavens, from every part of the castle. In the midst of its empty, endless hall of snow was a frozen lake, broken on its surface into 1,000 forms. Each piece resembled another. From being in itself perfect as a work of art, and in the center of this lake sat the Snow Queen when she was at home. She called the lake the Mirror of Reason, and said that it was the best, and indeed the only one in the world. Little Kay was quite blue with cold, indeed almost black, but he did not feel it, for the Snow Queen had kissed away the icy shiverings, and his heart was already a lump of ice. He dragged some sharp, flat pieces of ice to and fro, and placed them together in all kinds of positions, as if he wished to make something out of them, just as we try to form various figures with little tablets of wood, which we call a Chinese puzzle. Kay's fingers were very artistic. It was the icy game of reason at which he played, and in his eyes the figures were very remarkable, and of the highest importance. This opinion was owing to the piece of glass still sticking in his eye. He composed many complete figures, forming different words, but there was one word he never could manage to form, although he wished it very much. It was the word eternity. The Snow Queen had said to him, "When you can find out this, you shall be your own master, and I will give you the whole world and a new pair of skates." But he could not accomplish it. "Now I must hasten away to warmer countries," said the Snow Queen. "I will go and look into the black craters of the tops of the burning mountains, Etna and Vesuvius. As they are called, I shall make them look white, which will be good for them, and for the lemons and the grapes." And away flew the Snow Queen, leaving little Kay quite alone in the great hall which was so many miles in length. So he sat and looked at his pieces of ice, and was thinking so deeply, and sat so still, that anyone might have supposed he was frozen. Just at this moment it happened that little Gerda came through the great door of the castle. Cutting winds were raging around her, but she offered up a prayer, and the winds sank down as if they were going to sleep. And she went on till she came to the large empty hall and caught sight of Kay. She knew him directly. She flew to him and threw her arms round his neck, and held him fast, while she exclaimed, "Kay, dear little Kay, I have found you at last." But he sat quite still, stiff and cold. Then little Gerda wept hot tears, which fell on his breast and penetrated into his heart, and thawed the lump of ice, and washed away the little piece of glass which had stuck there. Then he looked at her, and she sang, "Roses bloom and cease to be, but we shall the Christ-child see." Then Kay burst into tears, and he wept so that the splinter of glass swam out of his eye. Then he recognized Gerda, and said joyfully, "Gerda, dear little Gerda, where have you been all this time?" "And where have I been?" And he looked all around him and said, "How cold it is, and how large and empty it all looks." And he clung to Gerda, and she laughed and wept for joy. It was so pleasing to see them that the pieces of ice even danced about, and when they were tired and went to lie down, they formed themselves into the letters of the word which the Snow Queen had said he must find out before he could be his own master, and have the whole world and a pair of new skates. Then Gerda kissed his cheeks, and they became blooming, and she kissed his eyes, and they shone like her own. She kissed his hands and his feet, and then he became quite healthy and cheerful. The Snow Queen might come home now when she pleased, for there stood his certainty of freedom, in the word she wanted, written in shining letters of ice. Then they took each other by the hand and went forth from the great palace of ice. They spoke of the grandmother and of the roses on the roof, and as they went on the winds were at rest and the sun burst forth. When they arrived at the bush with red berries, there stood the reindeer waiting for them, and he had brought another young reindeer with him, whose udders were full, and the children drank her warm milk and kissed her on the mouth. Then they carried Kay and Gerda first to the Finland woman, where they warmed themselves thoroughly in the hot room, and she gave them directions about their journey home. Next, they went to the Lapland woman, who had made some new clothes for them and put their sleighs in order. Both the reindeer ran by their side and followed them as far as the boundaries of the country, where the first green leaves were budding. And here they took leave of the two reindeer and the Lapland woman, and all said, "Farewell." Then the birds began to twitter, and the forest too was full of green young leaves, and out of it came a beautiful horse, which Gerda remembered, for it was one which had drawn the golden coach. A young girl was riding upon it, with a shining red cap on her head and pistols in her belt. It was the little robber maiden, who had got tired of staying at home. She was going first to the north, and if that did not suit her, she meant to try some other part of the world. She knew Gerda directly, and Gerda remembered her. It was a joyful meeting. "You are a fine fellow to go gadding about in this way," said she to little Kay. "I should like to know whether you deserve that anyone should go to the end of the world to find you." But Gerda patted her cheeks and asked after the prince and princess. "They are gone to foreign countries," said the robber girl. "And the crow?" asked Gerda. "Oh, the crow is dead," she replied. "His tame sweetheart is now a widow and wears a bit of black worsted round her leg. She mourns very pitifully, but it is all stuff. But now tell me how you managed to get him back." Then Gerda and Kay told her all about it. "Snip, snap, snare! It's all right at last," said the robber girl. Then she took both their hands and promised that if ever she should pass through the town, she would call and pay them a visit. And then she rode away into the wide world. But Gerda and Kay went hand in hand towards home, and as they advanced, spring appeared more lovely with its green verdure and its beautiful flowers. Very soon they recognized the large town where they lived, and the tall steeples of the churches, in which the sweet bells were ringing a merry peal as they entered it, and found their way to their grandmother's door. They went upstairs into the little room, where all looked just as it used to do. The old clock was going tick, tick, and the hands pointed to the time of day. But as they passed through the door into the room, they perceived that they were both grown up and become a man and woman. The roses out on the roof were in full bloom and peeped in at the window, and there stood the little chairs on which they had sat when children, and Kay and Gerda seated themselves each on their own chair, and held each other by the hand, while the cold, empty grandeur of the Snow Queen's palace vanished from their memories like a painful dream. The grandmother sat in God's bright sunshine, and she read aloud from the Bible, "Except ye become as little children, ye shall in no wise enter into the kingdom of God." And Kay and Gerda looked into each other's eyes, and all at once understood the words of the old song, "Roses bloom and cease to be, but we shall the Christ child see." And they both sat there, grown up, yet children at heart. And it was summer, warm, beautiful summer,